A marriage without love, a ranch without mercy, a woman with nothing left to lose. When Evelyn Carter's father is murdered by ruthless cattle thieves, she's left with a choice: accept a cold arrangement with the most dangerous rancher in Montana or lose everything. Caleb Rhodes offers her survival in exchange for a wife in name only. No love, no questions, no future beyond ink on paper. But when bullets fly and boundaries blur, their convenient lie becomes the most inconvenient truth either has ever faced. This is a story of two broken souls who discovered that sometimes the best marriages aren't planned, they're survived. If you're ready for a tale of grit, passion, and the untamed West, stay until the very end. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The smell of turned earth and dried blood still clung to Evelyn Carter's hands 3 days after they buried her father. She stood at the edge of the fresh grave, alone except for the wind that howled across the Montana grassland like a chorus of the damned. The preacher had left. The few neighbors who'd bothered to come had returned to their own struggles. Even the gravedigger had collected his coins and disappeared into the gray afternoon, leaving Evelyn with nothing but silence and the terrible weight of what came next. Her father, Thomas Carter, hadn't died peacefully. He'd died fighting, shot twice in the chest by cattle thieves who'd cut through their fence line under a moonless sky and driven off 30 head of their best stock. The sheriff had found him at dawn, face down in the mud near the north pasture, his rifle still clutched in his stiffening fingers. "Rustler's been getting bolder," Sheriff Mackey had told her, hat in hand, eyes avoiding hers. "Your daddy fought back. Probably saved the rest of your herd, Miss Carter. That counts for something." It counted for nothing. Not to the bank. Not to the drought that had already weakened their stock. Not to the fact that Evelyn Carter, at 20 years old, was now entirely alone in a territory that chewed up strong men and spit out their bones. She turned from the grave and walked back toward the house, a small, weathered structure that had seemed so much larger when her mother was alive, when laughter had filled the rooms instead of echoes. Now it felt like a coffin itself, cramped and airless. Inside, the kitchen table was covered with papers, bills, notices, demands. She'd spent the last 2 nights reading them by candlelight until her eyes burned and the words blurred together into one long sentence of doom. The ranch was drowning in debt. Her father had borrowed heavily to buy breeding stock 2 years ago, betting on good rainfall and fair prices. He'd gotten neither. The drought had been merciless, and the market had collapsed. Now the bank held notes on everything: the land, the house, what remained of the cattle. Payment was due in 6 weeks. 6 weeks to come up with $12,200. She might as well have needed the moon. Evelyn sat down heavily in her father's chair, the wood creaking under her weight. She picked up the notice from First Montana Bank, reading it for perhaps the 20th time, as if the words might magically change. They didn't. Final notice of debt collection. Payment in full required by October 15, 1887, or ownership shall transfer to the bank for liquidation of assets. Liquidation. Such a clean word for such a violent thing. They would take everything, sell it piece by piece until nothing remained of the life her parents had built from scratch. She thought about fighting, about hiring a lawyer, about appealing to the territorial courts. But lawyers cost money she didn't have, and courts favored banks over orphaned ranchers' daughters. She thought about running, packing what she could carry and heading east to Denver or Chicago, somewhere she could disappear into the mass of humanity and start over. But the thought lasted only a moment. This land held her mother's grave and now her father's. This house held every memory of her childhood, every moment of happiness she'd ever known. Leaving would be like cutting out her own heart. So she sat, paralyzed by impossible choices, until the knock came at the door. 3 sharp raps, authoritative and impatient. Evelyn's hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped against the wall near the door. Visitors were rare, and after what had happened to her father, caution had become survival. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "Name's Webb. I work for Caleb Rhodes. He'd like a word with you, Miss Carter." Caleb Rhodes. The name sent a ripple of something cold through her chest. Everyone in Carter County knew Caleb Rhodes. His ranch, the Triple R, was the largest in 3 territories, over 50,000 acres of prime grazing land stretching from the Bitterroot Range to the Yellowstone River. He ran 5,000 head of cattle, employed 30 men, and controlled water rights that made him more powerful than any government official within 200 miles. He was also, by all accounts, ruthless. Stories circulated in town, how he'd bought out failing ranchers for pennies on the dollar, how he'd driven off squatters with armed riders, how he'd once shot a man for stealing a horse and faced no consequences because the territorial judge was in his pocket. Some said he'd killed men during the range wars in Wyoming before coming to Montana. Others whispered darker things, that his first wife had died under mysterious circumstances, that he'd made his fortune through violence and intimidation. Evelyn had never met him. Men like Caleb Rhodes didn't associate with small ranchers barely scraping by. So why was he here now? She opened the door slowly, keeping the rifle within reach. The man on her porch was lean and weathered, probably in his 50s, with a face like saddle leather and eyes that had seen too much. He touched the brim of his hat politely. "Miss Carter, I'm Tom Webb, foreman at the Triple R. Mr. Rhodes sent me to fetch you. He's waiting at the Wayfarer Hotel in town. Says it's important." Important to him, maybe. I've got nothing to say to Caleb Rhodes. Webb's expression didn't change. He said you might feel that way. Asked me to tell you it concerns your future and that you'd regret not hearing him out. Is that a threat? No, ma'am. Just a message. Webb stepped back, giving her space. Mr. Rhodes will be in the hotel parlor until 6 o'clock. After that, the offer expires. What offer? Not my place to say, but I've worked for Caleb Rhodes for 12 years, and I've never known him to waste time on charity. If he wants to talk to you, there's a reason, and it's probably worth your while to listen. Webb turned and walked back to his horse, a big gray gelding tied to her fence post. He mounted smoothly despite his age and touched his hat again. 6 o'clock, Miss Carter. Hotel parlor. Then he was gone, cantering down the dirt road toward town, leaving Evelyn standing in her doorway with a dozen questions and no answers. She looked back at the papers on the table, at the impossible debt, at the ticking clock of her own destruction. What did she have to lose? The Wayfarer Hotel was the finest building in Cedar Falls, which wasn't saying much. It was a 2-story structure with a false front designed to make it look grander than it was, painted white but already graying from Montana dust. The parlor was on the first floor, a room with heavy curtains, overstuffed furniture, and a lingering smell of cigar smoke and whiskey. Caleb Rhodes sat near the window, reading a newspaper. Evelyn recognized him immediately, even though they'd never spoken. He was tall, she could tell even though he was seated, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from hard work rather than soft living. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, and his face was all sharp angles, strong jaw, high cheekbones, a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. He wore a black suit, well-tailored, with a silver watch chain across his vest. But it was his eyes that struck her, cold, calculating, the color of winter ice. He looked up as she entered, folding the newspaper with deliberate precision and setting it aside. Miss Carter, thank you for coming. His voice was low, controlled, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Southern, maybe, but worn down by years in the West. I haven't decided if I'm staying, Evelyn said, remaining near the door. Your man said you had an offer. I'm listening. Caleb Rhodes stood, and she realized he was even taller than she'd thought, easily over 6 feet. He gestured to a chair across from his. Please, sit. I'll stand. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, perhaps, or irritation. Suit yourself, this won't take long. He remained standing as well, his hands clasped behind his back. I heard about your father. You have my condolences. Do I? Evelyn kept her voice flat. Everyone knows you've been buying up failing ranches. I assume that's why you're here, to pick over the bones before the bank gets them. Actually, no. I'm not interested in your land. That surprised her. Then what do you want? Caleb Rhodes studied her for a long moment, his ice-blue eyes moving over her face as if assessing the value of livestock. It made her skin prickle with discomfort. I need a wife, he said finally. Evelyn blinked. Of all the things she'd expected, that wasn't even on the list. Excuse me? I need a wife. he repeated, as calmly as if he were discussing the weather. You need money and security. I'm proposing a business arrangement. She stared at him, trying to determine if this was some kind of cruel joke, but his expression remained serious, almost clinical. You're insane. Practical, he corrected. My father passed away 4 months ago. He left the Triple R to me, but with a condition in his will, I must be married within 6 months, or the ranch goes to my cousin Nathaniel, a gambler and a drunk who'd run the place into the ground within a year. I have 2 months left. I need a wife. Then find one. There are plenty of women who'd marry you for your money. True. But I don't want a wife who expects love, companionship, or children. I don't want someone who'll interfere with my business or make demands on my time. I want a legal arrangement, a marriage in name only. He paused. You need to clear your debts and secure your future. I can do that. In exchange, you become Mrs. Caleb Rhodes, live in my house, and fulfill the legal requirement. Nothing more. Evelyn felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. You want to buy me. I want to employ you, he said. There's a difference. You'd have your own room, your own space. I wouldn't touch you. After a year, if you wish to leave, I'll give you an additional $2,000 and your freedom. If you choose to stay, we continue the arrangement on the same terms. This is insane, she said again, but her voice sounded weaker this time. This is survival. Caleb Rhodes moved to a small table near the window and picked up a leather folder. He opened it, revealing papers covered in neat legal script. I've had my lawyer draw up a contract. It's straightforward. I pay off your debts immediately, all at 1,100. I provide you with housing, food, clothing, and a monthly allowance of $50 for personal expenses. In exchange, you marry me, live at the Triple R, and act as my wife in public settings when necessary. He held out the folder. Evelyn didn't take it. Why me? Why not some society woman from Helena or San Francisco? Because they'd expect more than I'm willing to give. You're desperate. That makes you honest. He said it without cruelty, just stating a fact. You won't pretend this is a love match. You won't harbor romantic illusions. You need a solution to an impossible problem, and I'm offering one. A marriage without love, without anything. Exactly. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to walk out, to tell this cold, arrogant man exactly what she thought of his proposition. But those papers on her kitchen table flashed through her mind. The debt, the deadline, the grave on the hill. I need time to think, she managed. You have until tomorrow noon. After that, I'll find someone else. Caleb set the folder on the table between them. Read the contract. You'll find the terms fair. If you agree, come to my lawyer's office on Main Street at noon tomorrow. We'll sign the papers, and I'll wire the money to the bank that afternoon. And if I don't? He met her eyes, and she saw no pity there, no warmth, just cold calculation. Then you lose your ranch, and I find another solution to my problem. Life goes on, Miss Carter, with or without you. He picked up his hat from a nearby chair and placed it on his head, adjusting the brim with practiced ease. One more thing, he said, turning back at the door. If you agree to this, you should know what you're getting into. I'm not a good man. I've done things most people would condemn. I'm hard, and I'm demanding, and I don't suffer fools or weakness. But I keep my word. If you become my wife, even in name only, I'll protect you, I'll provide for you, and I'll expect absolute loyalty in return. Loyalty to a stranger. We're all strangers until we're not. He touched the brim of his hat. Noon tomorrow, Miss Carter. Choose wisely. Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden floor, leaving Evelyn alone with the contract and the impossible choice. She didn't sleep that night. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, the contract spread before her, reading and rereading the terms by candlelight. It was exactly as Caleb Rhodes had described, cold, transactional, binding. There were clauses about financial obligations, living arrangements, public conduct. There was even a clause about termination. Either party could end the arrangement after 1 year with 30 days written notice. But there was nothing about affection, nothing about intimacy, nothing that even hinted at what most people meant when they said marriage. It was a business contract for the use of her name and presence, nothing more. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Evelyn walked back out to her father's grave. She knelt in the dew-damp grass, placing her hand on the simple wooden cross that marked the spot. "I don't know what to do, Papa," she whispered. "You always knew the right answer. You always knew how to fight." But her father was gone, and the only fight left was the one for survival. She thought about her mother, who died of fever when Evelyn was 12. She thought about the dreams they'd all shared, of building something lasting, of creating a legacy. She thought about what her father would say if he knew she was considering selling herself into a loveless arrangement with a man she didn't know. But she also thought about what he'd say if she gave up without fighting, if she let everything they'd built slip away because she was too proud to make a hard choice. Her father had been practical above all else. He'd done what needed doing, even when it hurt. Maybe this was what needed doing now. Evelyn stood, brushing grass from her skirt. She walked back to the house, washed her face in cold water from the basin, and changed into her only good dress, a simple gray wool that had been her mother's, altered to fit her slimmer frame. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She'd never been beautiful. Her face was too angular, her features too strong. Her hair was dark brown, almost black, and her eyes were an unremarkable hazel. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5'8", with a build more suited to ranch work than parlors and tea parties. She looked like what she was, a working woman, hardened by sun and loss. Was this really what Caleb Rhodes wanted? A wife who looked like she'd spent her life fighting Montana weather? But he'd been clear. He didn't want a society woman. He wanted someone desperate enough to accept his terms without illusion. She picked up the contract, folded it carefully, and placed it in her pocket. It was just past 9 in the morning. The lawyer's office wouldn't open until 10, but she could wait. The bank opened at the same time. She'd go there first, confirm the exact amount of the debt, make sure Caleb Rhodes wasn't somehow lying about what he'd pay. Not that she thought he was. A man like that didn't need to lie. He had enough power to simply take what he wanted. The fact that he was offering her anything at all was more than most would. The lawyer's office was a narrow room above the general store, accessed by an external staircase that creaked ominously with each step. A painted sign on the door read, "James Warner, Attorney at Law." Evelyn stood outside that door for a full minute before she could make herself knock. When she did, a voice called out immediately, "Come in." The office was cramped and cluttered, filled with books and papers stacked in precarious towers on every available surface. James Warner sat behind a massive oak desk that seemed far too large for the space, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose, ink staining his fingers. He looked up as Evelyn entered and smiled warmly. "Ah, Miss Carter, Mr. Rhodes said you might be coming. Please, sit." There was only one chair available. The rest were covered in documents. Evelyn sat, feeling the weight of the contract in her pocket like a stone. "I've come to discuss the arrangement," she said carefully. Of course. Warner shuffled through papers on his desk until he found a matching copy of the contract. "I drew this up myself, at Mr. Rhodes' instruction. Very straightforward, I think you'll find. No hidden clauses, no unusual terms. Quite generous, actually, considering—" He stopped himself, coughing awkwardly. "Considering I have no other options," Evelyn finished. Warner had the grace to look embarrassed. "Well, yes, that is, Mr. Rhodes is a practical man. He saw a solution that benefited both parties. He saw someone desperate enough to agree." "That too," Warner admitted. "But, Miss Carter, if I may speak frankly, and this is not legal advice, you understand, just one human being to another, you could do far worse. Mr. Rhodes is hard, certainly. Ruthless in business, absolutely. But he's honest. If he says he'll pay your debts, he will. If he says he'll provide for you, he will. And if he says he won't make demands of a personal nature, well, I've known Caleb Rhodes for 8 years, and I've never known him to break his word." Evelyn pulled the contract from her pocket and laid it on the desk between them. "I went to the bank this morning. The debt is $1,247, not $1,200. Interest accrued in the last week." Warner nodded, making a note. "Mr. Rhodes anticipated that. He authorized me to pay up to $1,300 to cover any additional costs. And my personal allowance, $50 a month. That's not negotiable? I'm afraid not. Mr. Rhodes was quite specific about the terms. What if I want to leave before a year is up? Warner consulted the contract. Section 7, subsection C states that either party may terminate the arrangement with 30 days written notice, but Miss Carter, you should be aware that early termination voids the departure bonus. You'd receive no additional compensation beyond what you'd already been given in monthly allowances. So if she left early, she'd walk away with almost nothing. The contract was designed to keep her in place for at least a year. Clever. And if he wants to end it early? She asked. Same terms apply, 30 days notice, no bonus, but Mr. Rhodes would still be legally obligated to ensure you have safe passage to wherever you wish to go and enough money to establish yourself, a minimum of $500, as stated in Section 8. Evelyn read through that section carefully. It was there, in black and white. Even if Caleb Rhodes decided she wasn't suitable and ended things early, she'd walk away with enough to start over somewhere else. Not a fortune, but more than she had now. More than she'd have if the bank seized everything. There's a clause here about public conduct, she said, pointing to Section 5. What exactly does fulfilling social obligations as Mrs. Rhodes mean? Attending certain events when required, cattlemen's association meetings, holiday gatherings, that sort of thing. Mr. Rhodes needs to present as a married man with a stable household. You'd need to play the role convincingly in public, though what happens behind closed doors is entirely separate. So I'd have to lie. Pretend we're a real married couple. You'd have to maintain appearances, Warner corrected gently. As many married couples do, I might add. Evelyn sat back, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't just a contract, it was a complete reconstruction of her life. She'd become someone else. Mrs. Caleb Rhodes, wife to a powerful rancher, living in a house that wasn't hers, playing a role she'd never wanted. But the alternative was losing everything and facing a world that had no place for a penniless woman with no family and no prospects. If I sign this, she said slowly, what happens next? Mr. Rhodes has arranged for a private ceremony tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Judge Harrison will officiate. He's a friend of Mr. Rhodes and has agreed to handle the matter discreetly. After the ceremony, you'll move to the RRR. Your belongings will be transported at Mr. Rhodes' expense. The bank will be paid in full by close of business tomorrow. Tomorrow? Less than 24 hours to leave behind everything she'd known. Evelyn's hands trembled as she picked up the pen Warner offered. Miss Carter, Warner said quietly, you don't have to do this. There might be other options. Oh, there aren't. She met his eyes. We both know there aren't. Warner nodded slowly. Then I'll witness your signature. Evelyn looked down at the contract one last time. The words blurred slightly, whether from tears or exhaustion, she couldn't tell. She thought about her father's grave on the hill, about her mother's voice singing while she worked in the kitchen, about every dream she'd ever had for her life. Then she thought about survival. She signed her name in firm, clear letters. Evelyn Marie Carter. Tomorrow, that name would die. Tomorrow, she'd become Evelyn Rhodes. And God help her, she had no idea if she was making the best decision of her life or the worst. Warner blotted the signature and countersigned as witness. It's done, he said softly. I'll inform Mr. Rhodes. He'll meet you at Judge Harrison's chambers tomorrow at 10 o'clock sharp. Do you know where that is? The courthouse, second floor. Exactly. Warner stood and extended his hand. For what it's worth, Miss Carter, I hope this arrangement brings you some peace. You've had more than your share of sorrow. Evelyn shook his hand, finding his grip warm and firm. Thank you, Mr. Warner. She left the office in a daze, walking down the creaking stairs into the bright afternoon sunlight. The street was busy, wagons rolling past, people going about their business, life continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. In less than a day, she'd be married to a stranger. Bound to a man she didn't love, didn't know, maybe didn't even like. Living in his house, eating his food, wearing clothes he paid for. Owned in everything but name. She walked back to her horse, tied outside the general store, and rode slowly toward home. The ranch looked different now, smaller, more fragile. Already like something that belonged to the past. That night, Evelyn packed what little she owned: her mother's dress, her father's pocket watch, a few books, some photographs. Everything else, the furniture, the kitchen goods, the tools, would stay with the house when the bank eventually sold it. She sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the sky turn from gold to crimson to deep purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound was lonely and wild and achingly familiar. Tomorrow, she'd wake up in a different place. Tomorrow, she'd be a different person. Tonight, she was still Evelyn Carter, daughter of Thomas and Mary, the last remnant of a family that had fought and died trying to build something lasting in this harsh, beautiful land. She pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill and whispered a prayer to the darkening sky. Not for love, because she knew that wasn't part of the bargain, just for strength, just for the courage to survive what came next. And somewhere, in a ranch house 50 miles away, Caleb Rhodes sat in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk before him, staring at his own copy of the signed contract. Tomorrow, he'd have a wife. Tomorrow, he'd secure his inheritance and his future. Tonight, he wondered, just for a moment, if he was making a terrible mistake. Then he pushed the thought aside, finished his whiskey in one burning swallow, and went to bed. Emotion was a luxury neither of them could afford. And in less than 12 hours, they'd bind themselves together in a marriage that promised everything except the one thing that might have made it bearable. They'd have security, they'd have stability, but they'd have no love at all. The ceremony lasted exactly 11 minutes. Evelyn stood in Judge Harrison's chambers wearing her mother's gray dress, freshly pressed but still showing its age in the faded fabric along the seams. Caleb Rhodes stood beside her in the same black suit he'd worn at the hotel, his expression unreadable as the judge droned through the standard vows. There were no flowers, no music, no guests except Tom Webb and the judge's clerk, who served as witnesses. When Judge Harrison asked if she took Caleb Rhodes to be her lawfully wedded husband, Evelyn's throat closed up for a moment. The word yes felt impossibly heavy, like swallowing a stone, but she said it. And when Caleb repeated the same vow, his voice was steady and emotionless, as if he were reading from a ledger rather than binding himself to another human being for life. "You may kiss the bride," Judge Harrison said with a perfunctory smile. Caleb turned to her, and for a moment their eyes met. She saw something flicker in those cold blue depths. Hesitation, perhaps, or discomfort. Then he leaned forward and pressed his lips briefly to her cheek, so quickly it barely registered as contact. "Congratulations," the judge said, shaking Caleb's hand. "Mrs. Rhodes, welcome to the family." Mrs. Rhodes. The name sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Caleb signed the marriage certificate with quick, efficient strokes, then handed her the pen. Evelyn stared at the blank line where her new name should go, feeling the weight of permanence crushing down on her chest. She signed, "Evelyn Rhodes." Her hand shook only slightly. "I've wired the bank," Caleb said as they descended the courthouse steps into the morning sunlight. "Your debts are cleared. Webb will handle transporting your belongings to the ranch this afternoon." "Thank you," Evelyn managed, though the words felt hollow. "The wagon's waiting." Caleb gestured to a large covered wagon hitched to 4 horses. The driver sat on the bench, reins in hand, looking studiously at nothing in particular. "It's a 5-hour drive to the Triple R. We should leave now if we want to arrive before dark." 5 hours in a wagon with a man she'd just married. 5 hours of silence or awkward conversation or whatever passed for communication between two people bound together by contract rather than affection. Evelyn climbed into the wagon without waiting for assistance. Caleb followed, settling onto the bench across from her with the same careful distance he'd maintained since they'd met. He rapped twice on the wagon wall, and the driver clicked to the horses. They rolled out of Cedar Falls in silence. The landscape changed as they traveled north and west, the rolling grassland giving way to rougher country dotted with pine and juniper. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still dusted with early snow despite it being only October. The air grew cooler, sharper, carrying the scent of sage and water. Caleb spent most of the journey looking out the wagon's opening, his profile hard against the landscape. Evelyn studied him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. The strong line of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose where it had been broken, the way his hands rested on his knees with a kind of controlled stillness that suggested a man always ready for violence. "You'll have the east bedroom," he said suddenly, breaking 2 hours of silence. "It's the largest guest room with windows facing the sunrise. There's a lock on the door if you want privacy. And your room? West side of the house. We won't disturb each other. Separate wings. Maximum distance. The arrangement made clear in architecture." "What should I call you?" Evelyn asked. "In private, I mean. Mr. Rhodes seems odd for a husband." "Caleb is fine. I'll call you Evelyn, unless you prefer something else." "Evelyn is fine." More silence. The wagon creaked and swayed over the rough road. "There are expectations," Caleb said after another long pause. "My ranch hands don't need to know the details of our arrangement, but they do need to see a united front. You'll take meals in the main house with me when I'm home. If anyone asks about our marriage, we met through mutual acquaintances and found we were well suited. Keep it simple. No details." "You want me to lie?" "I want you to maintain the illusion we agreed to." His tone remained neutral, neither harsh nor kind. "In public, we're a married couple. In private, we're business partners. The lines are clear. And if someone asks questions I can't answer, about your past, your family, I know nothing about you." Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, handing it to her. "I had this prepared. Basic information, where I was born, how long I've owned the R, names of my immediate family. Memorize it. Most people won't ask, but if they do, you'll have answers." Evelyn unfolded the paper and read the neat printed lines. "Caleb William Rhodes, born 1855, Virginia. Moved west 1876. Purchased R Ranch 1879. Father, Robert Rhodes, deceased. Mother, Catherine Rhodes, deceased. One cousin, Nathaniel Rhodes, current location unknown." That was it. 29 years of life reduced to 5 sentences. No mention of his first wife, no details about how he'd acquired the money to buy 50,000 acres, nothing about the rumors of violence and ruthlessness that followed his name. "This doesn't tell me anything real," she said. "It tells you everything you need to know for public consumption." Caleb looked at her directly. "My past is my own business, Evelyn. I'm not looking for intimacy or confession. I'm looking for discretion. Can you provide that?" She folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. "Yes." "Good." He went back to staring out at the landscape, and Evelyn found herself wondering what kind of man reduced his entire existence to 5 sentences. What kind of life left so little worth remembering, or so much worth hiding? The R came into view just as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Evelyn had expected something large, but the reality still took her breath away. The main house was enormous, 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a wide wraparound porch and green shutters on every window. Behind it stretched barn after barn, corrals filled with horses, fields of grazing cattle that seemed to extend to the horizon. She counted at least 15 separate buildings, plus what looked like a bunkhouse large enough to house an army. 32 men work here full-time, Caleb said, following her gaze. Another dozen seasonal hands during branding and drive. Webb runs the day-to-day operations. You won't need to interact with the men much, but they'll respect you as my wife. If anyone gives you trouble, tell Webb. He'll handle it. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the main house. A woman appeared on the porch, older, perhaps 60, with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a face that looked like it had never smiled in its life. "That's Mrs. Harrow," Caleb said, climbing down from the wagon. "She's been housekeeper here for 6 years. She'll show you around, help you get settled." He offered his hand to help Evelyn down, and she took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. For a moment they stood close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something else, something clean and sharp like winter air. Then he released her hand and stepped back, the distance between them reasserting itself. "Mrs. Harrow, this is my wife, Evelyn. She'll be taking over management of the household." Mrs. Harrow's eyes swept over Evelyn with the same assessing look Caleb had given her in the hotel, measuring, calculating, finding her probably wanting. But her voice was professionally neutral when she spoke. "Welcome, Mrs. Rhodes. I've prepared the east bedroom as Mr. Rhodes requested. Dinner will be served at 7 o'clock. Thank you, Evelyn said, forcing steadiness into her voice. I have business to attend to, Caleb said, already moving toward the barn. Webb will bring your things up when they arrive. Mrs. Harrow will show you the house. And just like that, he was gone, striding away across the yard without a backward glance, leaving Evelyn standing in front of this massive house with a stranger who looked at her like an unwelcome intrusion. Mrs. Harrow's mouth was a thin line. This way, please. The interior of the house matched its exterior grandeur: polished wood floors, expensive rugs, furniture that looked like it had been shipped from San Francisco or even further east. The main room had a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, bookshelves lining two walls, and windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light. The parlor, Mrs. Harrow said crisply, barely pausing. Mr. Rhodes rarely uses it. Dining room is through here, kitchen beyond that. You'll find I keep a well-organized household, Mrs. Rhodes. I've managed this house without interference for 6 years, and I'd prefer to continue doing so. The message was clear. Stay out of my way. They climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway stretched in both directions, doors lining both sides. Mr. Rhodes's rooms are at the west end, Mrs. Harrow said, gesturing right. Your room is here. She opened a door to the left, revealing a spacious bedroom with a four-poster bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk near the window, and another door that led to a small private bathing room. It was easily 3 times the size of Evelyn's bedroom at her father's house, furnished better than any room she'd ever seen, much less slept in, and it felt absolutely empty. I trust you'll find everything adequate, Mrs. Harrow said, though it wasn't really a question. It's very nice. Thank you. Dinner at 7, the housekeeper repeated. We keep a strict schedule. Breakfast at 6:30, lunch at noon, dinner at 7. Mr. Rhodes expects punctuality. I'll be on time. Mrs. Harrow nodded and left, closing the door behind her with a decisive click. Evelyn stood alone in the middle of the beautiful, empty room and felt the full weight of her situation settle over her like a blanket. This was her home now. This room, this house, this life she'd purchased with her signature and her name. She walked to the window and looked out at the endless expanse of the Triple R. Cattle dotted the fields like dark stones. Mountains rose in the distance, purple in the fading light. The sky was enormous, stretching from horizon to horizon without interruption. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And it was nothing like home. She unpacked her few belongings when they arrived an hour later, hanging her mother's dress in the massive wardrobe where it looked lost and shabby among the empty space. Her father's pocket watch went on the bedside table, the photographs she arranged on the desk, her parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful. Her mother holding infant Evelyn, her father standing proud in front of their small house. Ghosts of a life that no longer existed. At 7 o'clock precisely, Evelyn made her way downstairs to the dining room. The table was set for 2, though at opposite ends of the long expanse of polished wood. Caleb at the head, Evelyn's place set 12 feet away at the other end. Maximum distance, even at meals. Caleb was already seated, reading a cattle report. He looked up briefly when she entered, nodded, and went back to his reading. Mrs. Harrow brought out the food: roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. It was more food than Evelyn had seen in months, probably more than she'd eaten in a week during the worst of the drought. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of silverware and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, Evelyn couldn't stand it anymore. The house is beautiful. Thank you. Caleb didn't look up from his report. How long have you lived here? 8 years. You built it yourself? I hired builders. I supervised. He turned a page. The ranch came with a smaller house. I had this one constructed 3 years ago. More silence, more eating, more distance. May I ask you something? Evelyn said. Caleb set down his fork and looked at her, his expression suggesting this was an unwelcome interruption. What? What am I supposed to do here? You said I'd manage the household, but Mrs. Harrow made it very clear she doesn't need or want my help. Am I just supposed to sit in my room? You're supposed to be visible as my wife. Beyond that, occupy yourself however you wish. Read, walk, whatever women do with their time. He picked up his fork again. Just stay out of the ranch operations. The men don't need distractions. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. I grew up on a ranch. I know how to work cattle, fix fences, handle horses. I didn't bring you here to work. Caleb's tone was flat, final. I brought you here to fulfill a legal requirement. Do that, nothing more. He finished his meal in silence, then stood and left the room without another word, leaving Evelyn sitting alone at the far end of the too long table, feeling smaller and more useless than she'd ever felt in her life. The first week passed in a haze of loneliness and enforced idleness. Evelyn tried to help Mrs. Harrow with household tasks and was rebuffed every time. She attempted to introduce herself to the ranch hands and received polite but distant nods. Clearly, they'd been told not to engage with the boss's new wife. She explored the house and found it beautiful but sterile, like a museum of someone else's life. Caleb was rarely present. He rose before dawn and worked until after dark, taking meals in town or in the bunkhouse more often than in the main house. When they did share meals, conversation was minimal and strained. At night, Evelyn lay in her too-large bed and listened to the sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing, horses whinnying, men's voices drifting from the bunkhouse. And sometimes, very late, she'd hear footsteps in the hallway, passing her door, stopping briefly, then continuing to the west wing. Caleb, checking that she was safely locked away in her separate world. The second week, desperation drove her outside. If she couldn't help in the house and couldn't work the ranch, she could at least walk. The land here was different from her father's property, wilder, more rugged. She found trails that led up into the foothills, following creek beds lined with cottonwoods and aspens turning gold with autumn. She was returning from one of these walks, her skirts muddy from crossing a stream, when she found Tom Webb waiting on the porch. "Mrs. Rhodes," he said, touching his hat. "Mr. Rhodes is looking for you." Something in his tone made her heart skip. Is something wrong? You'll need to ask him. He's in his office. Evelyn had never been to Caleb's office, a room off the main parlor that he kept locked when not in use. She knocked hesitantly. "Come in." Caleb sat behind a massive desk covered in papers, ledgers, and maps. He looked up as she entered, his expression harder than usual. "Where were you?" he asked. "Walking. In the hills west of here. There's a creek." "I know where the creek is. This is my land." He stood, coming around the desk. "You left the house without telling anyone where you were going." "I didn't realize I needed permission to take a walk." "You need to tell someone. Mrs. Harrow, Webb, me. This isn't town, Evelyn. This is open range. There are hazards, wild animals, cliff edges, squatters who don't care that you're a woman." His jaw was tight. "If something happened to you and no one knew where to look, I can take care of myself. I've been doing it my whole life." "Not anymore." He moved closer, and she could see genuine anger in his eyes, the first real emotion she'd seen from him since the wedding. "You're my responsibility now, whether you like it or not. If you want to walk, fine, but you tell someone where you're going and when you'll be back. That's not negotiable." Evelyn felt her own anger rising. "So I'm a prisoner? Is that what this marriage is?" "It's what safety is," Caleb said sharply. "Last year, a rancher's wife went missing. They found her 3 days later at the bottom of a ravine with a broken neck. She'd been out riding alone." He paused, his voice dropping. "I won't have that happen on my property." The anger in his eyes shifted to something else, something almost like fear, though it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "I didn't mean to worry you," Evelyn said quietly. "I wasn't worried. I was inconvenienced. There's a difference." But his tone lacked conviction. "Just tell someone. Please." It was the first time he'd said please to her. Evelyn nodded. "I will. I'm sorry." Caleb returned to his desk. The moment of vulnerability, if that's what it had been, already shuddered away. "Was there anything else?" "Actually, yes. I'd like to write to my father's lawyer. There are some personal effects I need to retrieve from the house before it's sold." "I'll have Webb arrange it. Make a list." "Thank you." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Evelyn." She looked back. Caleb was staring at his desk, not meeting her eyes. The ranch can be dangerous, even for people who know what they're doing. I'd appreciate it if you'd be careful." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't affection, but it was the closest thing to concern he'd shown since she'd arrived. "I will," she said. "I promise." The third week brought the first real cold, a frost that turned the grass silver in the mornings and left ice on the water troughs. Evelyn woke one morning to find a heavy coat laid across the chair in her room, thick wool, lined with fur, sized perfectly for her. At breakfast, one of the rare meals Caleb was present for, she asked about it. "It gets cold here," he said without looking up from his newspaper. "You'll need proper clothes. Mrs. Harrow has measurements. She'll arrange for more." "Thank you, but I have money, my allowance. I can pay for my own clothes." "Use your allowance for personal items. Necessities come from the household budget." He turned a page. "That's how it works here." Evelyn studied him over her coffee cup. He sat rigid in his chair, shoulders squared, jaw tight, a man perpetually braced for attack. She wondered what had made him this way. What had happened to turn him into someone who measured out kindness in such careful, grudging portions? But asking would violate the unspoken rules of their arrangement. No intimacy, no personal questions, no crossing the lines they'd drawn. The fourth week, everything changed. Caleb was working on the roof of the main barn, replacing shingles damaged in a recent windstorm. Evelyn watched from her window, seeing him move with surprising agility for a man his size, balancing on the steep pitch with practiced ease. She was reading in the parlor when she heard the shout, then running footsteps, voices raised in alarm. Evelyn dropped her book and ran outside to find men clustering around the barn. Tom Webb was on the roof, kneeling beside a figure that lay crumpled and still. "Caleb." "What happened?" Evelyn ran toward the barn. "He slipped," one of the hands called down. "Fell about 15 feet, landed hard." "Is he conscious?" "Barely. Webb says not to move him till we know what's broken." Evelyn's mind raced through possibilities. Broken back, internal injuries, head trauma. They were hours from any doctor, and moving him wrong could kill him. "I'm coming up," she said, grabbing the ladder. "Ma'am, you shouldn't. I've handled injured men before. Move." She climbed quickly, her skirts hampering her movement, but adrenaline overriding caution. On the roof, Webb had already assessed Caleb's condition. "Conscious but dazed," Webb said. "Right leg's definitely broken. You can see the angle. Might have cracked some ribs. Hard to tell about internal bleeding." Caleb's face was pale, his breathing shallow. His eyes found Evelyn's as she knelt beside him. "Get inside," he managed through clenched teeth. "Absolutely not. Can you feel your toes?" "What?" "Your toes. Wiggle them if you can." Caleb's jaw tightened with effort, but she saw his boot shift slightly. Not paralyzed then. "We need to get him down and into the house," Evelyn said. "Webb, can you splint that leg here before we move him?" "Already on it, ma'am." They worked quickly, binding Caleb's broken leg with boards from the roof and strips torn from someone's shirt. He never cried out, but Evelyn saw sweat break across his forehead, saw his hands clench white-knuckled against the pain. Getting him down the ladder was the worst part. 4 men carried him while Evelyn guided the makeshift stretcher, her heart in her throat every time he groaned despite his obvious attempts to stay silent. They laid him on his bed, Evelyn's first time seeing his private space, and she barely registered the details beyond the large bed and the stark, almost military neatness of the room. "Someone needs to ride for the doctor and Helena," Evelyn said. "That's at least 4 hours there and back. In the meantime, I need hot water, clean bandages, whiskey, and laudanum if we have it." Mrs. Harrow appeared in the doorway, her face tight with disapproval. "Perhaps you should let me. Have you set a broken bone before?" Evelyn didn't wait for an answer. "I have. Get me what I need, now." For the first time since Evelyn had arrived, Mrs. Harrow obeyed without argument. The next hours blurred together in a haze of controlled crisis. Evelyn cleaned Caleb's wounds, road rash from the roof shingles, a deep cut on his temple, and wrapped his ribs tightly to support what she suspected were at least 2 fractures. The leg was the worst. She gave him whiskey until he was barely coherent, then set the bone as quickly as she could, feeling it grind back into place beneath her hands. Caleb passed out halfway through, which was a mercy. By the time the doctor arrived from Helena, Evelyn had done everything she could. The doctor, an older man named Patterson, examined her work and nodded approvingly. "You've got good hands, Mrs. Rhodes. The bones set properly, ribs are supported. Not much more I could have done myself." He mixed a stronger dose of laudanum. "He'll be laid up for 6 weeks minimum, longer if he doesn't rest properly, which, knowing Caleb, he won't." "I'll make sure he rests," Evelyn said. Dr. Patterson smiled slightly. "Good luck with that." He left detailed instructions and promised to return in a week to check on progress. After he'd gone, Evelyn sat in the chair beside Caleb's bed and finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion that had been hovering at the edges of her consciousness. It was nearly midnight. Mrs. Harrow appeared with tea and a disapproving frown. "You should get some rest, Mrs. Rhodes. I can sit with him." "I'm fine." "You've been here for 9 hours." "I said I'm fine." Mrs. Harrow's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "He's fortunate to have you." Evelyn looked at the woman who'd been so cold since her arrival and saw something new in her eyes, respect perhaps, or at least a grudging acknowledgement. "I'm his wife," Evelyn said simply. Even if we're not," she trailed off, unsure how to explain. "I've been with Mr. Rhodes for 6 years," Mrs. Harrow said quietly. "I've never seen him need anyone. He won't like being dependent. He doesn't have a choice." "No, but he'll fight it anyway." Mrs. Harrow set the tea on the bedside table. "There's a cot in the dressing room if you want to sleep nearby, or you can ring if you need anything." After she'd gone, Evelyn pulled the chair closer to the bed. Caleb's face was slack with laudanum, the harsh lines smoothed into something almost peaceful. She found herself studying him properly for the first time. Not the cold, controlled rancher, but just a man. A man who'd been hurt and who'd need care whether he wanted it or not. She settled into the chair, pulling a blanket around her shoulders, and kept watch through the night. And somewhere in those quiet hours, with only the sound of Caleb's breathing and the wind outside the window, Evelyn realized something had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained, the walls they'd built to keep this arrangement purely business, all of it had cracked. Because when someone fell, you caught them. Even if catching them meant everything between you would have to change. Caleb woke to pain and the unfamiliar sensation of someone holding his hand. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on the ceiling of his bedroom, then tracking downward to where Evelyn sat in a chair pulled close to his bed. Her head was tilted back against the cushion, eyes closed, breathing deep and even in sleep. Her hand rested on top of his, fingers curled loosely around his palm. He should pull away, should reinforce the boundaries they'd established, but the laudanum still dulled his edges and her hand was warm, and for just a moment he allowed himself the weakness of not being alone. Then she stirred, her eyes opening, and he saw her register their joined hands. A flush crept up her neck as she quickly withdrew. "You're awake," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "How do you feel?" "Like I fell off a barn." His own voice came out scratchy, his throat dry as dust. "That's because you did." She poured water from a pitcher on the bedside table, lifting his head carefully to help him drink. "Dr. Patterson says you have a broken leg, at least 2 cracked ribs, and a mild concussion. You're confined to bed for the next 6 weeks." 6 weeks? That's impossible. I have a ranch to run. Webb can manage. He's been doing it for years. Evelyn set the glass down and met his eyes with unexpected steel. "You're going to rest, Caleb. You don't have a choice." "I don't take orders in my own house." "Then consider it a strong recommendation from your wife." The word hung between them, strange and weighted with new meaning. "You could have died. You're lucky it was just a broken leg." Caleb tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his ribs. He fell back against the pillows, breathing hard. "Don't," Evelyn said sharply. "You'll make it worse. The ribs need time to heal." "How long have you been sitting there?" "Since yesterday afternoon. It's morning now." He looked at her properly then, seeing the exhaustion in her face, the wrinkled dress, the dark circles under her eyes. She'd stayed with him all night, watching over him like he mattered, like he was more than just a name on a contract. "You should get some rest," he said gruffly. "You look terrible." Compliments won't make me leave. But she smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her. I'll rest when you do. Until then, someone needs to make sure you don't do anything stupid. I never do anything stupid. You fell off a barn. The shingle was loose, could have happened to anyone. But it happened to you. So now you're stuck with me as your nursemaid, whether you like it or not. She stood smoothing her skirt. I'm going to get you some broth. Don't try to get up. I'm not an invalid. You are for the next 6 weeks. Get used to it. She left before he could argue further, and Caleb found himself staring at the empty doorway with something uncomfortably close to gratitude. He'd spent the last 8 years building walls around himself, keeping everyone at arm's length, trusting no one with anything that mattered. Now this woman he barely knew, this woman he'd married out of cold necessity, was nursing him with a competence and care that shook something loose inside him. He didn't like it. Didn't like being vulnerable, being dependent, being seen without the armor of strength and control he'd spent so long constructing. But she'd set his leg without flinching. She'd stayed by his bed all night. She'd looked at him with genuine concern rather than the calculation or fear he usually saw in people's eyes. And when she'd held his hand, even in sleep, it had felt like something he'd been missing without knowing it. The realization terrified him. The first week of Caleb's convalescence was a war of wills. He insisted he could manage on his own. Evelyn ignored him and brought meals, changed bandages, and monitored his temperature for signs of infection with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before. He tried to work from bed, demanding ledgers and reports. She allowed him 2 hours a day and not a minute more, citing doctor's orders. He attempted to get up and walk. She physically blocked the door and threatened to have Webb tie him to the bed frame. "You're the most stubborn patient I've ever had," she said on the 4th day, adjusting the pillows behind his back so he could sit up without straining his ribs. "And you're the most tyrannical nurse." "Good. Then we understand each other." She handed him a bowl of stew. "Eat. You've lost weight." "I've been lying in bed for 4 days. Of course I've lost weight." "You've been lying in bed refusing to eat properly because you're sulking like a child." Her tone was matter-of-fact, without heat. "Now eat, or I'll feed you myself." Caleb glared at her, but took the bowl. The stew was good, rich and hearty, with vegetables and beef and thick gravy. Mrs. Harrow's cooking, but he suspected Evelyn had supervised the preparation, making sure it was something he'd actually eat. "Where did you learn to set bones?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. They'd maintained careful silence on personal topics, but the forced proximity was eroding his discipline. "My mother. She was a midwife before she married my father, helped with injuries all over Carter County. When she got sick, I took over some of her duties." Evelyn sat in her customary chair, hands folded in her lap. "I've set broken arms, stitched wounds, delivered 3 babies. You were actually one of the easier cases." "Easier?" He raised an eyebrow. "I fell 15 feet. "Yes, but you stayed conscious and didn't fight me. Last summer I had to set a rancher's arm after his horse threw him, and he punched me with the good arm halfway through, broke my nose." Caleb stared at her. "Someone hit you?" He was in pain and not thinking clearly. "I didn't take it personally." She touched her nose self-consciously. "It healed fine, mostly. There's a small bump now, but you can barely see it." He looked at her nose, straight, unremarkable, and felt an irrational surge of anger at a man he'd never met for hurting her, even accidentally. The feeling was so foreign, so unexpected, that he had to look away. "You're good at this," he said gruffly. "The nursing. Better than most doctors I've met." "Thank you." She seemed genuinely pleased by the compliment. "I actually considered becoming a real nurse once, but there wasn't money for training, and my father needed help with the ranch." "Do you miss it? The ranch, I mean." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "I miss my parents. I miss feeling useful. The ranch itself." She shook her head. "It was dying long before my father was killed. The drought had already broken us. I think part of him was relieved when it ended, even though the ending was violent. At least he didn't have to watch everything he'd built crumble to dust." The honesty in her voice cut through Caleb's defenses. He'd assumed she resented the arrangement, resented him for forcing her into this bloodless marriage. But sitting here in the lamplight, speaking quietly about loss and survival, he saw her differently. Not as an acquisition or a legal necessity, but as a person who'd suffered and endured and kept fighting anyway. "I'm sorry," he said. "About your father. About the circumstances that brought you here." "Are you?" She looked at him directly. "You needed a wife. I needed money. We both got what we needed. That's how you framed it." "I did. And I meant it." He set the empty bowl aside. "But I didn't consider what it would cost you, what you'd be giving up." "I gave up nothing. I had nothing left to give up except my name. And honestly, Evelyn Rhodes sounds better than Evelyn Carter ever did." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This house is bigger than anything I ever lived in. I have more food than I can eat, more clothes than I need, more money than I've ever had. By any measure, I improved my situation." "Then why do you look so sad when you say it?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her composure cracked slightly, and he saw the truth beneath the careful words. "Because having everything and belonging nowhere feels lonelier than having nothing and belonging somewhere," she said quietly. "But that's not your fault. You were honest about what this was. I accepted the terms." Caleb felt something twist in his chest. Guilt, maybe, or regret. He'd been so focused on solving his own problem that he hadn't considered hers beyond the immediate financial crisis. He'd given her security but taken away purpose, given her comfort but not connection. "You belong here," he heard himself say. "You're my wife. That means something, even if we didn't marry for love." "Does it? What does it mean, Caleb?" She leaned forward, her eyes searching his face. "I'm not asking you to change our arrangement. I'm just trying to understand what I am to you. Employee? Obligation? Stranger living in your house?" He wanted to say stranger. It would be easier, cleaner. But after watching her care for him with such competence and patience, after seeing her strength and her sadness, after feeling her hand in his and realizing how long it had been since anyone had touched him with kindness, he couldn't make himself say it. "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't expect this." "Neither did I." They sat in silence as night deepened outside the windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 9 times. Evelyn stood smoothing her skirt. "You should sleep. The laudanum will help with the pain." "I don't like laudanum. Makes me fuzzy. And the pain makes you impossible. Pick your poison." She measured out the dose anyway, holding the spoon with the same implacable calm she'd shown all week. "Open." "I'm not a child." "Then stop acting like one and take your medicine." Caleb opened his mouth, accepting the bitter liquid with poor grace. Evelyn set the bottle aside and pulled the blanket up over his chest. "Do you need anything else before I go?" "Stay." The word came out before he could stop it, rough and uncertain. "Just for a while. Until I fall asleep." She hesitated, surprise flickering across her face. "All right." She settled back into the chair, and Caleb found his eyes growing heavy as the laudanum took hold. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was Evelyn's profile against the lamplight, her face thoughtful and impossibly gentle. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't sleep alone. The second week brought a shift in their dynamic that neither acknowledged but both felt. Evelyn moved a writing desk into Caleb's room so she could work on correspondence while keeping him company. She read to him from newspapers and novels when he grew too restless to sleep. They played chess. He won the first 3 games, then she started winning, much to his irritation and grudging respect. They talked, cautiously at first, then with increasing ease, about everything except the things that mattered most. He learned she could speak passable French, taught by her mother. She learned he'd been a scout in the army before buying the ranch. He learned she'd wanted to see the ocean. She learned he'd seen it and found it overrated. Small revelations, carefully rationed, building a foundation of something more than strangers but less than friends. The third week, Caleb was allowed to sit in a chair by the window for short periods. Evelyn would help him navigate the painful process of moving from bed to chair, her hands firm and steady on his arm, her body close enough that he could smell lavender soap and something uniquely her. "You don't have to help," he said once, hating his own weakness. "I can manage." "I know you can, but why should you suffer alone when I'm here?" She adjusted the pillows behind his back. "Besides, if you fall and break something else, I'll have to nurse you even longer. This is self-preservation." Practical as always. One of us has to be. She handed him a book. Page 43. You were enjoying it yesterday. It was a novel about exploration in Africa, full of adventure and danger. Caleb had always preferred factual accounts, but Evelyn had insisted he try fiction, and he'd discovered, much to his annoyance, that she was right. The story was engaging. Will you read to me? He asked, then immediately wanted to take it back. He sounded pathetic, needy, but Evelyn just smiled and took the book. Of course. Her voice was clear and expressive, bringing the words to life in a way that made the room disappear. Caleb found himself watching her more than listening. The way her eyebrows drew together during tense scenes, the slight smile when something amused her, the unconscious grace of her hands as she turned pages. She was beautiful, he realized with a start. Not conventionally, her features were too strong, her build too tall, but there was something compelling about her, strength without hardness, kindness without weakness, a quiet resilience that matched Montana itself. What are you staring at? Evelyn asked without looking up from the book. Nothing. Keep reading. She gave him a knowing look but continued the story. That night, after she'd helped him back to bed and said goodnight, Caleb lay awake listening to her footsteps retreat down the hall to her own room. The house felt emptier after she left. The silence felt heavier. He'd gotten used to her presence. Worse, he'd started looking forward to it. This wasn't part of the arrangement. The fourth week brought the storm. Evelyn had returned to sleeping in her own room once Caleb was stable enough not to need constant monitoring. But on a Thursday night in early November, thunder rolled across the mountains and rain began to hammer the roof with violent intensity. Wind screamed around the house, rattling windows and making the whole structure groan. Caleb woke to a crash, something heavy slamming against the side of the building. He tried to get up, forgetting his leg, and fell back with a curse as pain shot through him. His door opened, and Evelyn appeared in her nightgown, a lamp in her hand, her hair loose around her shoulders. Are you all right? I heard you. She stopped, taking in his position half out of bed, his face tight with pain. What were you thinking? Something hit the house. I need to check. You need to stay in bed. I'll check. She set the lamp down and came to help him lie back down. Another crash, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of breaking glass somewhere on the first floor. You can't go down there alone, Caleb said. Wake Webb. Get some of the men. In this storm? They're probably dealing with their own problems in the bunkhouse. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face in stark white. I'll be fine. Stay here. Evelyn, but she was already gone, taking the lamp with her, leaving him in darkness broken only by lightning. Caleb lay there cursing his broken leg, his helplessness, the storm, and every choice that had led to this moment. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Each crash of thunder made him flinch, imagining Evelyn hurt, trapped, alone. Then footsteps on the stairs, quick and light, and she was back. A tree branch came through the parlor window, she reported, slightly breathless. I pushed it back out and nailed boards over the window. The rain's coming in, but it'll hold until morning. Everything else is secure. You nailed boards by yourself? In the dark? I had the lamp, and I'm stronger than I look. She was soaked, her nightgown plastered to her body, her hair dripping. She shivered violently. You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia, Caleb said. Go change. I will. I just wanted to make sure you were... Thunder exploded directly overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the foundations. Evelyn jumped, and in the lightning flash that followed, Caleb saw real fear on her face. Are you afraid of storms? He asked. No, yes, maybe... She wrapped her arms around herself. My mother died during a storm like this. The fever took her, but I always associate that night with the thunder and the rain and feeling so helpless. Another crack of lightning, another boom of thunder. The house shuddered. Stay here, Caleb said impulsively. Tonight, you shouldn't be alone. I'm fine. I'll just... Evelyn. He caught her hand. Please, I don't want to be alone either. It was the truth, raw and unguarded. He expected her to pull away, to maintain the boundaries they'd worked so hard to establish, but instead she nodded. Let me change into something dry first. She disappeared into the dressing room attached to his bedroom, a space she'd been using to store some of her clothes for convenience during his recovery. When she emerged, she wore a simple cotton nightgown and wrapper, her hair toweled dry but still damp. She hesitated at the edge of the bed. "I can sleep in the chair. There's room here. I can't exactly move around much." Caleb shifted carefully to one side, creating space. "Unless you're uncomfortable." "No, it's fine." But her voice was uncertain as she climbed carefully onto the other side of the bed, maintaining distance between them. They lay in darkness, listening to the storm rage outside. Lightning painted shadows across the ceiling. Thunder rolled like artillery fire, and slowly, incrementally, the space between them closed. Caleb felt her hand brush his under the covers, felt her warmth seeping across the divide. He should move away, should reinforce the rules, but the storm seemed to have stripped away all his carefully constructed defenses, leaving only the truth. He was tired of being alone. "Caleb?" Evelyn's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes?" "Why did you really marry me? I know what you said about your father's will, but there must have been other options, easier options than binding yourself to a stranger." He was quiet for so long she probably thought he wouldn't answer, but the darkness made honesty easier. "My first wife died 8 years ago," he said finally. "Her name was Margaret. We'd been married 6 months. She was pregnant." He felt Evelyn shift, turning toward him, though he couldn't see her face. "What happened?" "Fever. It came on fast, took her in 3 days. The doctor couldn't save her or the baby." The words came hard, dredged up from a place he'd locked away. "I swore I'd never marry again, never let anyone that close. When my father put that clause in his will, I was furious. Felt like he was reaching beyond the grave to control me. But you did it anyway. Because losing the ranch felt like losing everything I'd built after Margaret died. This place, it's the only thing that kept me sane. Work, expansion, building something that couldn't be taken away by fever or fate." He paused. "So yes, I needed a wife, but I needed one who wouldn't expect what I couldn't give. Someone practical. Someone who understood it was business. Someone who wouldn't make you feel," Evelyn said quietly. "Yes." "And now?" Caleb turned his head on the pillow, finding her silhouette in the darkness. "Now I'm not sure what this is anymore." Lightning flashed, and for one brilliant second he saw her face clearly, those hazel eyes reflecting the storm, her expression open and vulnerable in a way it never was during daylight. Then darkness returned, and he felt her hand find his, their fingers intertwining with a rightness that terrified him. "I'm not sure either," she whispered, "but I know I don't want to go back to how it was before. Separate rooms, separate lives, pretending we're nothing to each other." "What do you want?" "I don't know. Something real, something that's ours, not just a contract." Her grip tightened. "Does that scare you?" "Yes. Me too." Thunder rolled overhead, but quieter now, the storm moving east. In the relative silence that followed, Caleb became aware of how close they were, how her shoulder pressed against his, how her breath stirred the air between them. "Evelyn," he said, his voice rough. "Yes?" "I'm going to kiss you. Tell me to stop if you don't want." She kissed him first. It was soft, tentative, nothing like the brief peck they'd exchanged at their wedding. Her lips were warm and tasted like rainwater, and something sweet. Caleb's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone as he deepened the kiss, years of loneliness and isolation breaking apart under the gentle pressure of her mouth. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn laughed softly. That wasn't in the contract. "No," Caleb agreed, his forehead resting against hers. "It wasn't." "Are you sorry?" He should be. Should reinforce the walls, protect himself, protect her from the mess he'd become. But lying there in the darkness with her in his arms, feeling more alive than he had in 8 years, he couldn't bring himself to lie. "No, I'm not sorry." She kissed him again, longer this time, and Caleb let himself fall into it, let himself feel without thinking about consequences or contracts or all the reasons this was dangerous. The storm raged outside, but inside, something warmer had begun to bloom. They fell asleep tangled together, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. And when morning came with pale sunlight streaming through the windows, neither of them moved to separate, both holding on to this fragile new thing they'd created from loneliness and unexpected tenderness. The contract had been about survival. This, whatever this was becoming, was about something infinitely more complicated and far more terrifying. This was about wanting, about needing, about two people who'd agreed to share a name discovering they might want to share much more. And in the clear light of morning, with Evelyn's breath warm against his chest and her hand over his heart, Caleb Rhodes realized that the walls he'd built to protect himself had become a prison. She'd found a way in. And heaven help him, he didn't want her to leave. The morning after the storm brought a clarity that was almost painful. Evelyn woke first, finding herself wrapped around Caleb like she'd been sleeping beside him for years instead of hours. His chest rose and fell beneath her cheek in steady rhythm, his heartbeat strong and sure under her palm. She should move, should slip away before he woke, and they had to face what had happened between them in the darkness. But she didn't want to move, didn't want to return to separate rooms and careful distance and pretending this pull between them didn't exist. Caleb stirred, his arm tightening around her waist before his eyes opened. For a moment they just looked at each other, the morning light painting everything in shades of gold. Then reality reasserted itself, and Evelyn saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "I should go," she said softly, though she made no move to leave. "Mrs. Harrow will be up soon, and if she finds us, let her find us. You're my wife." But his voice lacked conviction, and Evelyn heard the question beneath the words. "What are we now? What does this mean?" "Am I?" She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "Last night, in the storm, we crossed a line we said we'd never cross. So I need to know, Caleb, was that real or was it just fear and proximity and loneliness?" He was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted finally. "I don't know how to let someone close. Every instinct I have says to push you away before you can hurt me. I'm not going to hurt you. You can't promise that. Nobody can." He reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with unexpected gentleness. "But I know I don't want to go back to how things were. I know when I woke up and you were here, I felt something I haven't felt in 8 years." "What?" "Hope." The word came out rough, like it hurt to say. "That maybe I don't have to be alone anymore. That maybe this arrangement could become something neither of us planned, but both of us need." Evelyn's heart clenched. "I feel it too. This thing between us, I didn't expect it, didn't want it at first. You terrified me. This whole situation terrified me. But somewhere along the way, taking care of you, talking to you, learning who you are beneath all that armor, I started to want more. More than the contract. More than survival." She traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I want whatever this is, even if it's messy and complicated and nothing like what either of us planned." Caleb pulled her down into a kiss that was different from the ones they'd shared in the darkness. This one was deliberate, a choice made in full light. When they broke apart, he was almost smiling. "We're terrible at following our own rules," he said. "Then maybe we need new rules." "Such as?" "No more separate wings, no more pretending we're strangers, no more measuring out affection like it's a limited resource." She kissed him again, soft and quick. "We're married, Caleb. Let's actually try being married. I'll probably be bad at it. I'm not good with emotion or romance or any of the things women usually want." "Good thing I'm not most women." Evelyn sat up, immediately missing his warmth. "I don't need poetry or grand gestures. I just need honesty. Can you give me that?" "Yes." He caught her hand, holding her in place. "Starting with this, I'm falling for you, Evelyn. I don't know when it started, maybe when you set my leg without flinching, maybe when you stayed by my bed all night, maybe the first time you argued with me instead of backing down. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being just a solution to a problem and started being someone I can't imagine living without." The words hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath. She'd hoped, but she hadn't dared believe. Now here he was, this hard, closed man, offering her something fragile and precious. "I'm falling for you too," she whispered. "Probably have been since you demanded I tell someone before I went walking, like you actually cared if something happened to me." "I did care. I do care." He pulled her back down beside him. which is why what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult. The shift in his tone sent cold trickling down her spine. What's wrong? Nothing yet, but there's something you need to know about why I really needed to marry so urgently. Caleb's jaw tightened. My cousin Nathaniel, the one who'd inherit if I didn't marry. He's not just a drunk and a gambler. He's dangerous, and he's partnered with someone even worse. Who? Victor Langston. The name meant nothing to Evelyn, but she heard the weight behind it, saw the tension in Caleb's shoulders. Langston owns half of Wyoming and wants the other half, Caleb continued. He's built his empire by destroying anyone who gets in his way, buying out ranchers who can't pay their debts, driving off homesteaders, controlling water rights and railroad access. He's been trying to get the Triple R for 5 years because it controls the best water access in 3 territories. And your cousin is working with him? Nathaniel sold himself to Langston 2 years ago, gambling debts. Now he's Langston's creature, doing whatever he's told in exchange for Langston covering his losses. Caleb's voice was flat, factual, but Evelyn heard the anger beneath. When my father died, and the will was read, I knew exactly what would happen if Nathaniel inherited. He'd sell the ranch to Langston within a month, take his payoff, and leave 30 families without work and this whole valley under Langston's control. So you married me to stop that. I married you to save the ranch, yes, but Evelyn, he turned to face her fully. Langston isn't going to just accept defeat. He's been quiet these past weeks, but that won't last. Once he realizes I've met the terms of the will and the ranch is legally mine, he'll come for it another way. What way? I don't know yet, but men like Langston don't quit. They just change tactics. Caleb's hand tightened on hers, which means you might be in danger. By becoming my wife, you've become a target. Evelyn felt fear spike through her, but she pushed it down. She'd lived through her father's murder, through drought and debt and desperation. She wasn't about to run from some land baron with delusions of empire. Then we face him together, she said firmly. That's what married people do, right? Face problems as a team? I don't want you involved in this. It's my fight. It became my fight the moment I signed that contract, the moment I took your name. She sat up straighter, meeting his eyes with steel in her own. I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting, Caleb. I grew up on a ranch. I can shoot, I can ride, and I'm not afraid of rich men who think they can take whatever they want. If Langston comes for us, he'll find I'm not easy prey. Something flashed in Caleb's eyes, pride maybe, or desire. You're extraordinary, you know that? I'm practical, there's a difference. But she smiled. Now tell me everything about Langston, his weaknesses, his methods, his connections. If we're going to fight, we fight smart. They spent the next hour with Caleb detailing everything he knew about Victor Langston, his properties, his business practices, his network of corrupt officials and hired guns. Evelyn listened carefully, her mind already working through strategies and possibilities. He'll go for the water rights first, she said when Caleb finished. That's the key to everything else. Without water, the cattle can't survive, and the ranch becomes worthless. Exactly. Which is why I've spent the last 5 years securing every water source on my land, buying up parcels, filing claims, making sure Langston can't cut me off. Caleb shifted in bed, wincing as his ribs protested. But there's one water source I don't fully control. Silver Creek runs through my northern pasture, but it originates on federal land. If Langston can get the government to reroute access, can he do that? With enough money and the right connections? Yes. Caleb's expression was grim. I've been fighting a legal battle over those water rights for 2 years. So far I've held him off, but Langston's patient. He'll keep pushing until he finds a weakness. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Harrow's voice called through the wood. Mr. Rhodes, Webb needs to speak with you, says it's urgent. Caleb and Evelyn exchanged a look. Nothing good ever came from urgent messages. Send him up, Caleb called back. Mrs. Harrow's footsteps retreated, and a moment later Webb appeared in the doorway. His weathered face was tight with concern, and he barely registered Evelyn's presence in Caleb's bed before speaking. We've got problems, boss. Someone cut the fence on the north pasture last night during the storm. Drove off about 50 head of cattle. 50? Caleb tried to sit up, cursing when pain stopped him. Damn it, Same place as last time? Same section, clean cut, professional job. They knew exactly what they were doing. Webb glanced at Evelyn, then back to Caleb. And they left something behind. A calling card, you might say. He held out a piece of paper, folded once. Caleb took it, unfolded it, and Evelyn watched his face go hard as stone. "What does it say?" she asked. Caleb handed her the paper without a word. The message was brief, written in careful script. "Marriage won't save you. One way or another, the Triple R will be mine. VL." "Langston," Evelyn breathed. "He's making his move." Caleb's voice was cold, controlled, but she could see fury burning in his eyes. "Webb, gather the men. I want every inch of fence checked, every water source monitored, and armed patrols on the property boundaries starting tonight." "You're in no condition to run operations," Webb said bluntly. "Legs still got 4 weeks healing time at least." "Then you'll be my legs. But this is my ranch, my fight, and I'll be damned if I let Langston intimidate me from a sickbed." Caleb's jaw was set in a way that said arguing would be pointless. "Send someone to town. I need Sheriff Mackey out here to file a report about the theft. And send word to my lawyer in Helena. I want him reviewing every land deed, every water claim, every document related to this ranch. If Langston's looking for legal weaknesses, we need to find them first." "I'm on it." Webb turned to go, then paused. "Mrs. Rhodes, good to see you're still here. The boss has been less of a bear with you around." He left before Caleb could respond, closing the door behind him with what might have been a knowing smile. "Less of a bear?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Ignore him. Webb thinks he's funny." But Caleb's attention was already back on the note, his mind clearly racing through scenarios and strategies. 50 head isn't enough to cripple us, but it's a warning. Langston's showing me he can strike whenever he wants, that my security isn't as tight as I thought. Or he's testing your response, seeing how you'll react, what defenses you'll put in place. Evelyn stood, moving to the window that overlooked the northern pastures. "If I were planning to take this ranch, I'd want to know my enemy's capabilities first. This might just be reconnaissance." Caleb studied her with new appreciation. "You have a strategic mind. My father fought rustlers for years. You learn to think like your enemy." She turned back to him. "Langston expects you to be weakened by your injury, distracted by defending against small attacks. But what if we went on offense instead?" "What do you mean?" "You said Langston has enemies, other ranchers he's destroyed, people he's crossed. What if we built a coalition against him? Strength in numbers." Evelyn's mind was working quickly now, pieces falling into place. "He's powerful, but he's not invincible. If enough people stand together, even he can't fight everyone at once." Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. "It's risky. Anyone who stands against Langston becomes a target. They're already targets, they just don't know it yet. Langston won't stop with you. He'll keep expanding, keep consuming, until he owns everything." She came back to the bed, sitting on the edge. "But if we can show people there's another way, that they don't have to surrender or run, maybe we can turn the tide." "You're talking about war. I'm talking about survival." "Which is something I know a little bit about." Evelyn took his hand. "We can't fight this alone, Caleb. We need allies." He looked at their joined hands, then up at her face, and she saw the moment he made his decision. "All right, we'll try it your way. But Evelyn, this gets dangerous. You pull back. I won't have you hurt because of my problems." "Our problems," she corrected. "I'm your wife, remember? We're in this together." The words hung between them, weighted with new meaning. They weren't just talking about Langston anymore. They were talking about everything, the ranch, the future, whatever this thing between them was becoming. "Together," Caleb repeated, pulling her down for a kiss that sealed the promise. "I'm still getting used to that word." "So am I," Evelyn smiled against his mouth. "But I think I like it." The next 2 weeks transformed the Triple R into something between a fortress and a staging ground. Despite his injury, Caleb ran operations from his bedroom, sending Webb and Evelyn as his proxies to meet with neighboring ranchers. The response was mixed. Some were willing to stand against Langston, others too frightened of retribution. But slowly, carefully, they built a network of allies. Evelyn discovered she had a talent for persuasion. She spoke plainly about what Langston had already done, what he would do if left unchecked, and what they could accomplish if they stood together. Some men were resistant to taking direction from a woman, but most came around when they saw her conviction and Caleb's unwavering support. "You're good at this," Caleb told her one evening after she'd returned from meeting with 3 ranchers south of the Triple R. "Better than I'd be. They trust you. They trust that I'm not trying to manipulate them for personal gain." Evelyn was reviewing notes at the desk they'd set up in his room, her hair falling loose from its pins after a long day. "Half of them thought you were going to try to take over their operations. I convinced them you just want to protect what's yours." "What's ours?" Caleb corrected quietly. She looked up, surprised and pleased by the distinction. "Ours," she agreed. They'd fallen into a new rhythm over these weeks. Evelyn still slept in Caleb's room, ostensibly to monitor his recovery, but really because neither of them wanted to return to separate spaces. They were careful around the ranch hands, and Mrs. Harrow, maintaining propriety, but in private they let the walls fall away. It was during one of these private moments, 3 weeks after the storm, that everything changed again. Evelyn was helping Caleb with the painful exercises Dr. Patterson had prescribed to prevent his leg muscles from atrophy. She supported his weight as he practiced putting pressure on the healing bone, her hands firm on his arm. "That's good," she encouraged. "A few more steps." "Easy for you to say. You too. You're not the one—" Caleb's words cut off as the door burst open. Webb stood there, his face pale. "Riders coming in fast. 20 men, maybe more. Langston's at the front." Caleb's expression went cold and hard. "Get the men armed and ready. No one fires unless fired upon, but make sure everyone's visible. I want Langston to see exactly how many guns he's facing." "You can't meet him like this," Evelyn protested as Caleb reached for his crutches. "You can barely walk." "I'm not meeting him from a sickbed like an invalid. Help me downstairs." There was no arguing with that tone. Evelyn grabbed his coat and helped him navigate the stairs, every step clearly painful, but his face showing nothing. By the time they reached the porch, the riders had arrived. Victor Langston was everything Evelyn had imagined and worse. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in expensive clothes that looked out of place on a working ranch. He had steel gray hair, cold eyes, and a smile that never reached them. Behind him, 20 armed men sat their horses in a show of force designed to intimidate. "Caleb Rhodes." Langston dismounted smoothly, his movements suggesting a man comfortable with power. "Heard you had an accident. Hope you're recovering well." Well enough to receive uninvited guests. Caleb stood straight despite the crutches, projecting strength even in weakness. "Though I have to wonder why you brought an army to a neighborly visit." "Protection. These are dangerous times." Langston's eyes slid to Evelyn. "And this must be the new Mrs. Rhodes. Congratulations on your marriage. How fortunate that you found someone willing to marry you just in time to meet your father's requirements." "Fortunate indeed," Caleb said smoothly. "Evelyn, this is Victor Langston. Langston, my wife." Evelyn met Langston's gaze without flinching, seeing calculation behind the false courtesy. "Mr. Langston, I'd say it's a pleasure, but my father taught me not to lie." Langston's smile sharpened. Direct. "I appreciate that in a woman. Your father was Thomas Carter, wasn't he? Shame what happened to him. Cattle thieves are a plague on this territory." The implication was clear. Langston knew everything about her, including her vulnerabilities, but Evelyn refused to show fear. "My father died fighting for what was his," she said clearly, "a trait I inherited." "I'm sure you did." Langston turned back to Caleb. "I'll be direct as well, Rhodes. Your marriage doesn't change the fundamental problem. You have something I want, and I always get what I want. The question is whether you're smart enough to sell to me at a fair price, or stubborn enough to lose everything fighting the inevitable." "Everything I have says you'll never own this ranch," Caleb replied. "Not through legal means, not through intimidation, not through theft. The Triple R stays in my family." "Your family?" Langston laughed, cold and sharp. "You mean your wife of a few weeks? The penniless rancher's daughter you bought to fulfill a legal technicality?" His gaze moved between them, assessing. "Tell me, Mrs. Rhodes, how much did my friend Caleb here pay for you?" Enough to cover your father's debts? Is that the going rate for wives these days? Evelyn felt Caleb tense beside her, felt him preparing to defend her, but she stepped forward before he could speak. More than you could afford, Mr. Langston, she said clearly. Because unlike you, my husband understands that some things can't be bought. Loyalty, integrity, the kind of respect that makes men follow you because they want to, not because they fear you. You can threaten us all you want, but you'll find we're not as easy to break as the people you've destroyed before. Silence fell across the yard. Langston's men shifted uneasily in their saddles. Webb and the Triple R hands watched with open admiration, and Langston's smile disappeared entirely. Brave words from someone with so much to lose, he said softly, dangerously. I wonder if you'll feel the same when your husband's ranch is dust and ashes. Is that a threat? Caleb's voice cut like a whip. It's a promise. Langston remounted his horse with fluid grace. You have 1 month, Rhodes. Sell to me at my price, or I'll take this ranch apart piece by piece. Your water rights, your land claims, your business relationships, I'll destroy them all until you're begging me to buy this worthless dirt for pennies. Get off my property. With pleasure. But remember what I said, 1 month. After that, whatever happens is on your head. Langston touched his hat in mock salute to Evelyn. Mrs. Rhodes, a pleasure. I do hope we'll meet again under more pleasant circumstances. He wheeled his horse and rode out, his 20 men following in a cloud of dust. The Triple R hands stood watching until they were out of sight, then slowly dispersed, talking in low, angry voices. Caleb sagged slightly, and Evelyn immediately moved to support him. Come on, you need to sit down. I need to... Sit down, she said firmly. You've made your point. You stood up to him, showed him you're not afraid. Now let me get you inside before you collapse and give him exactly what he wants. Caleb allowed her to help him back into the house, and it was only once they were alone in his office that he let the mask fall. He sank into his chair with a grimace, his face tight with pain. 1 month, he said quietly. He's giving me 1 month to sell. Which means he's planning something for 1 month from now, something big. Evelyn paced the room, her mind racing. What happens in a month? Any legal deadlines, contract renewals? The water rights hearing. I'd almost forgotten. Caleb leaned back, closing his eyes. The Federal Land Commissioner is reviewing the Silver Creek access claims. If Langston can convince the commissioner to rule in his favor, he cuts off your water supply and the ranch dies. Evelyn stopped pacing. That's his play. He's been working on this for months, maybe years. The cattle theft, the intimidation, that's all distraction. The real fight is legal. And I'm fighting it from a sickbed with a broken leg. Caleb's laugh was bitter. Langston's timing is perfect. He probably had someone watching the ranch, waiting for the right moment to strike. Evelyn moved to his chair, kneeling beside it so she could meet his eyes. Then we fight smarter. You said your lawyer in Helena is reviewing your water claims. Get him working double time. Find every precedent, every legal protection, every argument we can make. And while he's doing that, we work on the commissioner himself. You can't bribe a federal official. I'm not talking about bribes. I'm talking about public pressure, about making sure the commissioner knows that any decision in Langston's favor will be seen as corruption. She took his hand. You have allies now, Caleb. All those ranchers we've been talking to. They can write letters, file complaints, make noise. Force the commissioner to make his decision in the light instead of in Langston's pocket. Caleb studied her face, and she saw hope mixing with the fear. You really think we can win this? I think we have to try. Because if we don't, everything we're building, this ranch, this life, whatever we're becoming together, it all disappears. She squeezed his hand. I'm not ready to lose that. Are you? No. He pulled her up into his lap, ignoring the protest from his ribs, and kissed her hard. No, I'm not ready to lose anything, especially not you. Then we fight. Together. Together, he agreed, and this time the word felt like a vow. The month that followed was a blur of activity. Evelyn coordinated letter-writing campaigns, organized meetings, and personally visited every rancher within 3 days' ride to build support. Caleb worked from his office, his lawyer sending daily updates on the legal arguments and precedents they were building. The house became a headquarters, with people constantly arriving with news, updates, and offers of help. And through it all, Evelyn and Caleb grew closer, not just as partners in this fight, but as something deeper. They worked side by side, talked late into the night, shared fears and hopes they'd never voiced before. The marriage that had started as a cold transaction became something warm and real and worth fighting for. 3 days before the water rights hearing, everything exploded. Evelyn was in town purchasing supplies when she heard the explosion. A deep, rolling boom that echoed off the mountains and sent people running into the streets. "What was that?" someone shouted. A rider came galloping down Main Street, his horse lathered with sweat. "The Triple R! The dam on Silver Creek! Someone blew it up! Water's flooding the valley!" Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She abandoned her purchases and ran for her horse, riding harder than she'd ever ridden in her life. The scene that greeted her at the ranch was chaos. Water poured through the broken dam, flooding pastures and threatening the main barn. Ranch hands worked frantically to move cattle to higher ground, while others tried to divert the worst of the flooding. And in the middle of it all stood Caleb, balanced on his crutches, his broken leg clearly causing him agony, shouting orders and coordinating the response. Evelyn rode straight to him. "You should be inside." "My ranch is flooding. I'll be damned if I watch from a window." He caught her arm as she dismounted. "Langston did this. Had to be. No one else would." "We'll deal with Langston later. Right now we need to save what we can." Evelyn turned to Webb, who was directing men toward the barn. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. We'll lose the south pasture for sure, maybe the equipment shed. If we can redirect the flow before it hits the barn." "Show me where. I'll help." For the next 6 hours, Evelyn worked alongside the men, digging trenches, piling sandbags, doing everything possible to minimize the damage. Caleb refused to leave despite his injury, coordinating efforts and making split-second decisions that saved buildings and livestock. By the time the water finally slowed to a manageable flow, they were all exhausted, covered in mud, and looking at thousands of dollars in damage. But they'd saved the ranch. The main buildings were intact, most of the herd was safe, and the water, though displaced, could be redirected once they rebuilt the dam. "He's trying to destroy us before the hearing," Caleb said that night as they surveyed the damage by lamplight, "showing the commissioner that my water management is unstable, that I can't be trusted with access to Silver Creek." "Then we show the commissioner exactly who destroyed that dam." Evelyn pointed to marks in the mud near the dam's remains. "Look, boot prints, and they're recent, after the explosion but before the flooding got bad. Someone stayed to watch their handiwork." Webb, who joined them, knelt to examine the prints. "These match the riders who came with Langston. I'd recognize these boot heels anywhere. Custom-made, expensive." "Get the sheriff out here," Caleb ordered, "and make sure he documents everything. The prints, the evidence of explosives, all of it. I want a formal complaint filed against Langston before the hearing." "Will it be enough?" Evelyn asked quietly once Webb had left. "I don't know, but we're not going down without a fight." Caleb pulled her close despite his crutches, resting his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens at that hearing, I want you to know something." "What?" "Marrying you was supposed to be a business arrangement, a means to an end. But you've become the best decision I've ever made." His voice was rough with emotion. "If we lose this ranch, I'll rebuild somewhere else. But I won't lose you, not for anything." Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. "You're not going to lose either of us. This ranch is your legacy, and I'll be damned if Victor Langston takes it." She kissed him hard. "We're going to win, Caleb, because we're fighting for something he'll never understand. We're fighting for home." The hearing was scheduled for 2 days later in Helena. Caleb could travel despite his injury, but the journey would be difficult. They left before dawn, arriving at the territorial building just as the sun crested the mountains. The hearing room was packed. Ranchers on both sides, lawyers, government officials, and Victor Langston himself, seated in the front row with a smile that said he'd already won. The land commissioner was a small, nervous man named Alistair Briggs who clearly wanted to be anywhere but here. He called the hearing to order and asked each side to present their case. Langston's lawyer went first, arguing that the Triple R's water management had proven unstable and dangerous, citing the recent dam failure as evidence. He presented documents showing alternative water access routes, that wouldn't require federal land claims, making Caleb's access to Silver Creek unnecessary. It was a slick, professional presentation designed to make Caleb look incompetent and his claims redundant. Then Caleb's lawyer stood. James Warner, the same man who'd drawn up Caleb and Evelyn's marriage contract, was in his element now, presenting evidence of Langston's pattern of manipulation and destruction, the boot prints linking Langston's men to the dam explosion, testimony from other ranchers about similar tactics used against them. "This isn't about water management," Warner said clearly. "This is about a powerful man trying to destroy a competitor through sabotage and legal manipulation. Commissioner Briggs, if you rule in Mr. Langston's favor, you're not making a legal decision. You're enabling theft." Commissioner Briggs looked distinctly uncomfortable. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Warner. Do you have proof?" "We have physical evidence, witness testimony, and a pattern of behavior that speaks for itself." Warner gestured to the packed room. "And we have the voices of 30 ranchers who've signed a petition demanding that Silver Creek access remain open to all legitimate claims, not just those approved by Mr. Langston." Evelyn stood then, moving to the front of the room. She hadn't planned to speak, but seeing Langston's smug confidence, she couldn't stay silent. "Commissioner Briggs, may I address the commission?" Briggs looked flustered. "This is highly irregular." "Let her speak," Langston said, his tone amused. "I'm curious what the new Mrs. Rhodes has to say." Evelyn ignored him, focusing on the commissioner. "My name is Evelyn Rhodes. 6 weeks ago, I was Evelyn Carter, a rancher's daughter from Cedar Falls. My father was murdered by cattle thieves. I lost everything except the clothes I wore and my family's name. I married Caleb Rhodes because I needed to survive, and he needed to meet the terms of his father's will." She saw Langston's eyes narrow, saw people in the room leaning forward. "But in these weeks, I've learned something about my husband and the R. They represent everything good about this territory: hard work, integrity, building something lasting from raw land. Mr. Langston represents the opposite. He wants to own everything without building anything. He wants power without responsibility. And if you give him control of Silver Creek, you're not just hurting one ranch. You're telling every small operator in Montana that the law protects the powerful, not the just." "Mrs. Rhodes," Commissioner Briggs tried to interrupt. "I'm almost finished. Commissioner, my father died fighting for what was his. I won't let his death, or the deaths of everyone else Langston has destroyed, mean nothing. Rule fairly. Look at the evidence. And remember that your decision today will define whether this territory has a future worth fighting for, or whether we're all just waiting for men like Langston to buy us out and tear us down." She sat down to absolute silence. Then slowly, the ranchers in the room began to applaud. Not all of them. Some were clearly Langston's allies, but enough that Commissioner Briggs looked shaken. Langston wasn't smiling anymore. The commissioner called a recess to review the evidence. Evelyn and Caleb waited in the hallway, surrounded by supporters who congratulated her speech. "You were magnificent," Caleb said quietly, taking her hand. "Completely terrifying and absolutely magnificent." "I just told the truth." "Which is the most dangerous thing you can do to a man like Langston." He kissed her forehead. "Whatever happens now, I'm proud of you." 2 hours later, Commissioner Briggs returned with his decision. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this commission finds that the R Ranch has legitimate and long-standing claims to Silver Creek access. Furthermore, evidence suggests that recent damage to water management structures was the result of criminal sabotage, not mismanagement. Therefore, all existing water rights are hereby confirmed and protected under federal law. The room erupted. Langston shot to his feet, his face dark with fury, but there was nothing he could do. The decision was final. Evelyn and Caleb stood together, hands clasped, as their allies surrounded them with congratulations and relief. They'd won. Against all odds. Against a man who'd never lost before, they'd won. Langston pushed through the crowd, stopping in front of them. His expression was cold murder. "This isn't over, Rhodes. Not by a long shot." "Yes, it is," Caleb said calmly. "You lost, Langston. Accept it and move on." "I never lose. I just changed tactics." Langston's eyes moved to Evelyn. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts, Mrs. Rhodes. Nothing good lasts forever." He left before Caleb could respond, his men trailing behind him like dark shadows. Webb appeared at Caleb's elbow. Want me to keep an eye on him? No, he's done. He knows if he comes after us now, after losing publicly, he'll look weak. Men like Langston value their reputation above everything. Caleb turned to Evelyn. Let's go home. The ride back to the Triple R was triumphant. Word had spread fast, and as they rode through Cedar Falls, people came out to wave and congratulate them. The small ranchers, the shopkeepers, everyone who'd suffered under Langston's shadow, they all saw this as their victory too. That night, Evelyn and Caleb stood on the porch of the main house, looking out at land that was finally, truly theirs. The water flowed in Silver Creek, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the future stretched ahead full of possibility instead of threat. We did it, Evelyn said softly. We actually did it. You did it. Your speech, your courage, your refusal to back down. That's what won today. Caleb pulled her close, his arms strong around her despite the crutches he'd finally abandoned that morning. I'm falling in love with you, Evelyn Rhodes. Completely, utterly, terrifyingly in love. She turned in his arms, her heart full to bursting. I'm already there. Have been for weeks, probably. I just didn't know how to tell you. He kissed her under the Montana stars, and it felt like every promise they'd never made, every hope they'd been afraid to voice, finally coming true. The marriage that had started with nothing but signatures and survival had become something neither of them had dreamed possible. It had become love. And this time, nothing and no one was going to take it away. The victory at the water rights hearing should have been the end of it. Evelyn and Caleb had won against impossible odds, secured their future, and exposed Victor Langston's tactics for what they were. For 3 weeks, life at the Triple R settled into something that felt almost normal. Caleb's leg healed steadily, allowing him to finally walk without crutches. The damaged dam was rebuilt, stronger than before. And most importantly, the careful distance that had defined their marriage dissolved completely. They moved Evelyn's belongings into Caleb's room permanently, though Mrs. Harrow had stopped pretending to be surprised by their arrangement weeks ago. In fact, the housekeeper had become almost warm, occasionally offering Evelyn a rare smile when she thought no one was watching. The ranch hands had long since accepted Evelyn as their boss's true partner, seeking her opinions on ranch matters and following her directions without question. It was the life Evelyn had never dared to dream of during those desperate days after her father's death. Not just survival, but happiness. Not just security, but love. She should have known it was too perfect to last. The trouble started on a cold December morning when Webb came to the house with news that made Caleb's face go pale. Langston's made a formal complaint to the territorial marshal, Webb said, standing in Caleb's office with his hat in his hands. Claims you and your associates conspired to present false evidence at the water rights hearing. Says the boot prints were fabricated, the testimony was coerced. That's insane, Evelyn said from her seat near Caleb's desk. We have a dozen witnesses who saw those prints before anyone touched them. Langston's got his own witnesses saying otherwise, high-paid men who'll swear to anything he tells them to. Webb's expression was grim. Marshall's coming out here tomorrow to investigate. If he believes Langston's story, they could reverse the water rights decision and bring charges against me for perjury, Caleb finished, which would cost me the ranch and possibly put me in prison. Evelyn felt ice slide through her veins. They'd won the battle, but Langston wasn't done with the war. He was just changing tactics, exactly as he'd promised. Can he actually make this stick? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. With enough money and the right marshal? Maybe. Caleb stood, pacing to the window. Langston doesn't need to win. He just needs to tie us up in legal fights until we're broke and exhausted. Even if we're eventually cleared, the damage will be done. Then we need to end this, permanently. Evelyn's mind was already racing through possibilities. We can't just keep defending. We need to go after him directly. Caleb turned to look at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Langston has spent years building his empire through intimidation and corruption. Men like that always have secrets, things they can't afford to have exposed. She stood, moving to stand beside him. What if we found those secrets and used them against him? Webb shifted uncomfortably. That's dangerous talk, Mrs. Rhodes. Langston's not a man you want to cross that way. He's already crossed us every way possible. I'm just suggesting we return the favor. Evelyn looked at Caleb. You know people in this territory? You have connections, allies. Someone must know something about Langston that he doesn't want public. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with thought. There might be something. Rumors I've heard over the years but never pursued because they seem too risky. What kind of rumors? About how Langston made his first fortune. Official story is he inherited money from family back east, invested wisely in land. But there were always whispers that the money came from somewhere else, somewhere illegal. Caleb's eyes met hers. If we could prove that, if we could show his entire empire is built on criminal foundations, it would destroy him, Evelyn finished. But how do we prove something like that? We'd need access to his business records, bank documents, correspondence from those early years. Caleb shook his head. It's impossible. Langston keeps everything locked down tight. What about his cousin? Webb spoke up suddenly. Nathaniel Rhodes, I mean. He's been working for Langston for years. He'd know where the bodies are buried. Caleb's expression darkened. Nathaniel would never help me. He hates me for getting the ranch instead of him. But he's also a gambler and a drunk, Webb pointed out, which means he's probably in debt again, and men in debt can be motivated. Evelyn saw where this was going. You want to approach Nathaniel, offer him something in exchange for information about Langston. It might work, Webb said, especially if Langston's been treating him poorly. Men like Nathaniel don't have loyalty, just self-interest. We appeal to that. We might get what we need. Caleb was shaking his head before Webb finished. Too dangerous. If Nathaniel tells Langston we approached him, it'll give Langston exactly what he needs to paint us as conspirators. And if we don't try, Langston wins anyway, Evelyn countered. Caleb, we can't just wait for the marshal to arrive and hope for the best. We need leverage, something that makes Langston back off permanently. She's right, boss, Webb added quietly. We've been playing defense since this started. Maybe it's time to attack. Caleb looked between them, his expression torn. Evelyn could see the war happening behind his eyes, his instinct to protect her warring with his knowledge that she was right, that this might be their only chance. If we do this, he said finally, we do it smart. No direct contact with Nathaniel. We find an intermediary, someone who can approach him without it coming back to us. I know someone, Webb said, old friend from my army days. He runs a saloon in Butte where Nathaniel's been gambling. He could make contact, feel Nathaniel out without raising suspicion. Do it, Caleb ordered, but carefully. And Webb, if this goes wrong, if Langston finds out, we need deniability. Your friend was acting on his own, pursuing business interests. We never authorized anything. Webb nodded and left to send the necessary telegrams, leaving Evelyn and Caleb alone in the office. This is dangerous, Caleb said quietly, pulling her into his arms. If Langston realizes what we're trying to do, we're already in danger. At least this way we're fighting back. Evelyn rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. I'm not afraid of Langston. Not anymore. I'm more afraid of losing what we've built here. We won't lose it. I promise you that. He tilted her face up, kissing her with a fierceness that spoke of possession and protection. Whatever happens, we face it together. The marshal arrived the next afternoon, a lean man in his 50s named Thomas Garrett, with hard eyes and a reputation for honesty. He spent 2 hours examining the site of the dam explosion, interviewing ranch hands, and reviewing the evidence that had been presented at the hearing. Evelyn and Caleb answered his questions calmly, presenting documentation and witness statements with the same care they'd used in Helena. But underneath the professional facade, Evelyn's heart pounded with fear. Everything they'd fought for hung on this man's interpretation of events. I'll need to interview your witnesses separately, Marshal Garrett said after the initial examination, and I'll be speaking with Mr. Langston's people as well. I expect the investigation to take about a week. Of course, Caleb said evenly. We're happy to cooperate fully. After Garrett left, Evelyn found Caleb in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. He looked up as she approached, and she saw the worry etched in the lines around his eyes. How bad is it? She asked. Hard to say. Garrett's honest, which is good, but he's also thorough. If Langston's witnesses are convincing enough, he stopped, shaking his head. We need that information from Nathaniel. It's the only card we have left to play. 3 days later, Webb returned from Butte with news. He found Caleb and Evelyn in the office going over ranch accounts, trying to calculate how long they could afford legal battles if the marshal's investigation went against them. "My friend made contact," Webb said without preamble. "Nathaniel's interested. Turns out Langston's been cutting him off, threatening to stop covering his debts unless Nathaniel does some things he's not comfortable with." "What kind of things?" Caleb asked. "My friend wasn't specific, but reading between the lines, I'd say Langston wants Nathaniel to testify against you in the marshal's investigation. Probably wants him to claim you paid him to lie about the dam explosion or something similar." Evelyn felt sick. Would Nathaniel do it? He's considering it, but he's also scared of Langston. Apparently Victor's been making threats, implying that accidents can happen to people who disappoint him. Webb pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Nathaniel sent this. My friend says it's genuine." Caleb took the paper, unfolding it carefully. Evelyn leaned over his shoulder to read. It was a letter in shaky handwriting, clearly written by someone drunk or terrified or both. The letter outlined a proposal. Nathaniel would provide evidence about Langston's illegal activities in exchange for protection and enough money to leave the territory and start over somewhere Langston couldn't reach him. The amount he wanted was steep, $5,000, but the information he claimed to have was worth far more. He says he has documents proving Langston's first fortune came from a train robbery in Colorado 20 years ago, Caleb read aloud. 3 men killed, $50,000 in gold stolen. Langston was one of the robbers, but he killed his partners and disappeared with the gold. Used it to buy his first ranch, then built from there. "Can we trust this?" Evelyn asked. "Nathaniel could be setting us up." "My friend says Nathaniel's genuinely scared. Whatever he knows, it's enough that Langston would kill him to keep it quiet." Webb looked at Caleb. "Question is, do we pay him?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter. $5,000 is most of our reserve funds. If this is a trap, we'll be broke. And if it's real, we'll have the evidence to destroy Langston permanently, Evelyn pointed out. "Caleb, we can rebuild finances. We can't rebuild our lives if Langston wins." He looked at her, and she saw the decision forming in his eyes. "All right, tell Nathaniel we'll pay. But we need proof first, at least enough to verify his story is real. And the exchange happens on neutral ground with witnesses." Webb nodded. "I'll arrange it. My friend suggested a meeting in Helena, public place, plenty of people around. Nathaniel hands over preliminary evidence, we verify it's legitimate, then we pay and get the rest." "When?" Caleb asked. 3 days. That gives us time to get the money together and for Nathaniel to gather everything he has." "Do it. And Webb, bring 4 of our best men. I don't trust Langston not to try something." The next 3 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Marshal Garrett continued his investigation, his expression revealing nothing. Langston made a point of riding past the Triple R's borders with his men, a silent reminder of the threat he represented. And Evelyn found herself waking in the night, anxiety gnawing at her stomach, wondering if they were making a terrible mistake. On the morning they were scheduled to meet Nathaniel, Caleb found her standing at the bedroom window, staring out at the pre-dawn darkness. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Too many thoughts." She leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "What if this goes wrong? What if Nathaniel's lying, or Langston finds out, or—" "Then we deal with it, together." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Evelyn, I need you to know something. If this plan fails, if we lose everything, I don't care. As long as I have you, I can rebuild from nothing. But if something happens to you because of my fight with Langston, I'll never forgive myself." "Nothing's going to happen to me," she said firmly. "I'm going to Helena with you. I'm seeing this through, and we're going to win. Then we're going to come home and live the life we fought for." "I love you," Caleb said, the words still sounding slightly uncertain in his mouth, like he was learning a new language. "I love you more than this ranch, more than my pride, more than anything. I need you to remember that, whatever happens today. I love you too." She kissed him, trying to pour every ounce of certainty and courage into the contact. "Now, let's go finish this." They rode to Helena with Webb and 4 ranch hands, the $5,000 secured in Caleb's saddlebags. The meeting place was a restaurant near the Capitol building, public, well lit, with plenty of witnesses. Webb had chosen well. Nathaniel was already waiting when they arrived, hunched in a corner booth with a whiskey glass in front of him. He looked worse than Evelyn had imagined, gaunt, hollow-eyed, his hands shaking as he raised the glass to his lips. This was a man being eaten alive by fear and guilt. Caleb slid into the booth across from him, while Evelyn sat beside her husband. Webb and the ranch hands took positions at nearby tables, watching the doors. "Nathaniel," Caleb said quietly, "you have something for me?" "You have my money?" Nathaniel's voice was hoarse, desperate. "Show us what you have first." Nathaniel pulled a folder from inside his coat, sliding it across the table. His hands trembled so badly the folder nearly fell to the floor. Inside were several documents, bank records, correspondence, and a yellowed newspaper clipping about a train robbery in Colorado, dated 1867. Caleb examined each document carefully while Evelyn read over his shoulder. The bank record showed a large deposit made by Victor Langston in 1867, shortly after the robbery, in an amount that matched the stolen gold. The correspondence included a letter from Langston to an unknown associate discussing disposing of loose ends, dated 2 days after the robbery when the other robbers had been found dead. And the newspaper clipping described the crime in detail, including a sketch of one of the suspected robbers that bore a striking resemblance to a younger Victor Langston. "This is substantial," Caleb said quietly. "But it's not conclusive. A good lawyer could argue coincidence." "I have more," Nathaniel whispered urgently. Letters Langston wrote to his mother bragging about the robbery. The name of the fence who bought the gold. Testimony from people who knew him back then. He leaned forward desperately. "But I need your word you'll protect me. Langston finds out I betrayed him. He'll kill me." "How do we know you haven't already told him about this meeting?" Evelyn asked, her instincts prickling with warning. Nathaniel's eyes went wide with fear. "I haven't, I swear. I'm terrified of him. That's why I need to leave, get far away." The restaurant door crashed open. Victor Langston strode in with 6 armed men, his face dark with fury. Customers scattered, some screaming, as Langston's men drew guns. "I had a feeling you'd try something like this, Rhodes," Langston said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "My cousin may be a drunk, but he's still useful when properly motivated." Nathaniel had gone white as a sheet. "Victor, please, I didn't want to— Shut up." Langston's eyes were fixed on Caleb. "You think you can destroy me with old newspaper clippings and forged documents? You're even more foolish than I thought." "Those documents aren't forged," Caleb said, standing slowly. "And by now copies have been sent to every newspaper between here and Denver, along with a full account of your train robbery and the murders you committed. It was a bluff. They hadn't had time to copy anything, but Langston didn't know that." "You're lying," Langston snarled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Am I? You really want to take that chance?" Caleb's voice was cold, controlled. "You came here with guns to threaten me in a public place with dozens of witnesses. You're proving everything I've said about you, that you're a criminal who rules through violence and fear. I'm proving I'm a man who protects what's his." Langston's hand moved to his own gun. "And I'm about to prove what happens to people who cross me." Everything happened at once. Webb and the ranch hands drew their weapons. Langston's men did the same. Customers dove under tables. And Evelyn, moving on pure instinct, grabbed the folder and shoved it under her coat. "Everyone stop!" Marshal Garrett's voice cut through the chaos. He stood in the doorway with 2 deputies, all 3 with guns drawn. "Drop your weapons. Now!" For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, Langston's men began lowering their guns. Webb and the ranch hands followed suit. "What's going on here, Garrett demanded, moving into the room. His eyes swept over the scene, taking in Langston's aggressive stance, Caleb's defensive position, and Nathaniel cowering in the booth. "Self-defense," Caleb said before Langston could speak. "Langston came in here with armed men and threatened my life. There are dozens of witnesses." "That's a lie," Langston snapped. "I came here to stop a conspiracy. Rhodes and his wife were meeting with my employee to fabricate evidence against me." Is that true, Mr. Rhodes? Garrett asked. Caleb met the marshal's eyes steadily. We were meeting with Nathaniel Rhodes to discuss family business. Mr. Langston interrupted with threats and weapons. As for evidence, he gestured to Evelyn, who pulled out the folder and handed it to the marshal. Garrett examined the contents, his expression growing darker with each page. These are serious allegations, he said finally. Mr. Langston, you're going to need to come with me to answer some questions. This is absurd. I've done nothing wrong. But Langston's confidence had cracked. He knew what was in those documents, knew what they could do to him. Then you'll have no problem answering questions. Garrett nodded to his deputies. Escort Mr. Langston to my office. The rest of you, he looked at Caleb and Langston's men. I want statements from everyone. As Langston was led away, he turned back to look at Caleb and Evelyn. The expression on his face was pure hatred. This isn't over, he said quietly, dangerously. Yes, Evelyn said clearly, stepping forward. It is. You lost, Mr. Langston. Accept it. For a moment she thought he might break free from the deputies and come for her, but then he turned and left, his empire already beginning to crumble around him. Nathaniel slumped in the booth, tears streaming down his face. He'll kill me. When he gets out, he'll kill me. He's not getting out, Garrett said grimly. If these documents are authentic, and my preliminary examination suggests they are, Victor Langston is going to prison for murder and robbery. You'll need to testify, Mr. Rhodes. I will. Just please, you have to protect me. Nathaniel looked at Caleb desperately. Cousin, please. I know I've been terrible to you, but I'm begging you. Caleb stared at the man who'd tried to steal his inheritance, who'd allied with their enemy, who'd only turned because of his own fear and greed. Evelyn expected him to refuse, to let Nathaniel face the consequences of his choices. Instead, Caleb pulled out the saddlebag with the money and set it on the table. Take it. Get as far from here as you can. Start over, Nathaniel. Actually try to be better than you have been. His voice was hard but not cruel. But if you ever come back, if you ever threaten my family or my ranch again, I won't be this generous. Understood? Nathaniel grabbed the money like a drowning man grabbing a rope. Thank you. Thank you. I don't deserve... No, you don't. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I'm choosing to be different than men like Langston. Caleb stood, taking Evelyn's hand. Marshal, we'll give our statements whenever you need them. But right now, I'm taking my wife home. The ride back to the Triple R should have felt triumphant, but Evelyn found herself shaking with delayed reaction. They'd won, truly, finally won. But they'd come so close to disaster. If Marshal Garrett hadn't arrived when he did, if Langston had started shooting, if any of a dozen things had gone differently. Hey, Caleb said softly, pulling his horse alongside hers. We're safe. It's over. I know. She took a shaky breath. I'm tired of fighting, tired of being afraid. Then we stop fighting. We focus on building instead of defending. He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. We build a home, Evelyn. A real one. The kind where our children can grow up safe and happy, where we can grow old together without looking over our shoulders. Children? She looked at him, surprised and touched by the casual way he'd said it, like their future was certain and bright. Someday, when you're ready. His eyes were warm despite the fading light. I want it all with you. The whole messy, complicated, beautiful life we were too practical to plan for when we got married. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears. Happy tears. I want that too. All of it. They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, arriving just as the sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and gold. The ranch looked beautiful in the fading light, solid, enduring, theirs. Mrs. Harrow met them at the door with relief written across her usually stern face. Thank heaven. When Webb sent word there was trouble in Helena, it's handled, Caleb assured her. Langston's finished. The Triple R is safe. Good. Then you'll want to know, Dr. Patterson stopped by this afternoon. Said you missed your follow-up appointment for that leg. He wants to see you tomorrow. Caleb waved a hand dismissively. The leg's fine. I've been walking on it for weeks. Nevertheless, he wants to examine it properly. Something about making sure the bones set correctly. Mrs. Harrow's tone suggested arguing would be pointless. He'll be here at 10 o'clock. After she left, Evelyn turned to Caleb with a raised eyebrow. Missed appointments? Not very responsible of you. I was busy saving our ranch from a land-grabbing criminal, but he smiled as he said it, pulling her close. Though I suppose I should make sure I'm healing properly. Can't have a rancher with a bad leg. Especially not one who plans on chasing children around someday, Evelyn teased. Someday. Not tomorrow. He kissed her, deep and slow. Tomorrow? I plan on sleeping late, eating a proper breakfast, and spending the day doing absolutely nothing productive. Sounds perfect. But the next day brought one final surprise. Dr. Patterson arrived precisely at 10, examining Caleb's leg with professional thoroughness. Healing nicely, he pronounced. Another month, and you'll barely notice you ever broke it. You're lucky your wife knew what she was doing. Bad bone setting can cripple a man for life. She's extraordinary, Caleb agreed, smiling at Evelyn. Speaking of your wife, Patterson turned to Evelyn with a slight frown. Mrs. Rhodes, you look pale. Have you been feeling well? Fine, Evelyn said, surprised. Just tired from all the stress lately. When did you last have your monthly courses? The question was blunt, medical, and it took Evelyn a moment to process. When she did, her heart stopped. She'd been so focused on fighting Langston, on surviving each day, that she hadn't noticed, hadn't paid attention to the calendar or her body's rhythms. But now, thinking back, 6 weeks, she whispered. Maybe 7. Caleb went very still beside her. Evelyn? Dr. Patterson pulled out his stethoscope. May I examine you, Mrs. Rhodes, just to be certain? The examination was brief and professional. When Patterson straightened, there was a smile on his weathered face. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes. You're going to be parents. I'd estimate you're about 8 weeks along, which means the baby should arrive sometime in early summer. The world seemed to tilt and realign. Evelyn looked at Caleb and saw her own shock and wonder mirrored in his face. A baby. They were going to have a baby. Are you certain? Caleb asked, his voice rough. As certain as I can be at this stage. Mrs. Rhodes is young and healthy, and if she continues to take care of herself, I see no reason the pregnancy shouldn't proceed normally. Patterson packed his bag. I want to see you monthly, Mrs. Rhodes, and no more riding into danger or working yourself to exhaustion. You're building a child now. That takes precedence over everything else. After he left, Evelyn and Caleb sat in stunned silence. A baby, Evelyn finally said. Caleb, we're having a baby. I know. He reached for her hand, holding it like something precious and fragile. Are you happy? I know we didn't plan. I'm terrified and thrilled and completely unprepared, Evelyn interrupted. But yes, I'm happy. Are you? Caleb pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. I never thought I'd have this again. After Margaret and the baby died, I convinced myself I didn't deserve another chance. But now, his voice broke. Now I get to watch you grow round with our child. I get to be there when our baby is born. I get to build a family with you. We get to build it together, Evelyn corrected, pulling back to look at him. This baby, they're going to know love, Caleb. Real love, not the cold, practical arrangement we started with. They're going to grow up on this ranch with parents who fought for each other and won. They're going to have your courage, Caleb said, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach, and your strength and your absolutely terrifying ability to face down men twice your size without flinching. And your integrity, Evelyn added, your loyalty and your surprising capacity for gentleness when you forget to be hard. They stood there in the morning sunlight, holding each other and contemplating the miracle they'd created. Outside, the ranch continued its daily rhythm, cattle lowing, men working, the land enduring as it always had. But inside, everything had changed. The months that followed were the happiest of Evelyn's life. Langston was prosecuted and sentenced to 20 years in prison for the train robbery and murders. The charges against Caleb were dropped completely once the truth about Langston's sabotage came out. The water rights were secured permanently, and the R prospered under their joint management. As Evelyn's pregnancy progressed, Caleb became almost comically protective. He refused to let her ride horses, insisted she rest every afternoon, and drove Mrs. Harrow to distraction with his constant questions about proper nutrition and prenatal care. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," Evelyn protested one evening as Caleb carefully arranged pillows behind her back. "You're carrying my child. That makes you precious cargo." He kissed her forehead. "Humor me. I lost one child already. I won't lose another." So she humored him, accepting his protectiveness as the love language of a man who'd lost too much and was determined to protect what remained. And in truth, she didn't mind the coddling. After years of fighting and struggling alone, it felt good to be cherished. Spring came early that year, painting the mountains green and filling the air with the scent of new growth. Evelyn spent her days preparing the nursery, a sunny room next to their bedroom that had once been storage. Mrs. Harrow proved surprisingly helpful, producing quilts and baby clothes she'd been storing for years. "These were for Mr. Rhodes's first child," she explained quietly one afternoon. "His wife Margaret was about as far along as you are when she took sick. I've kept them all this time, hoping he'd find happiness again." "Thank you," Evelyn said, touched by the gesture, "for taking care of him all these years, for helping him survive until he could live again." "He survived," Mrs. Harrow agreed, "but he didn't live until you came. You gave him that, Mrs. Rhodes. You gave him back his heart." The baby came on a warm June evening, after 12 hours of labor that had Caleb pacing the hallway like a caged animal. Dr. Patterson handled the delivery with calm efficiency, and when Evelyn finally heard her daughter's first cry, she wept with relief and joy. "A girl," Patterson announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant in Evelyn's arms. "Healthy lungs on this one. Congratulations, Mrs. Rhodes." Caleb burst into the room before Patterson could finish, his face pale with worry. "Evelyn? Is the baby? Come meet your daughter," Evelyn said, her voice rough from crying and laughing. Caleb approached slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter. When he looked down at the baby in Evelyn's arms, his expression transformed into something so tender it made Evelyn's heart ache. "She's perfect," he whispered, reaching out with one finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. "She has your nose. And your eyes, I think. Hard to tell yet, but they look blue." "What should we name her?" Caleb asked, settling carefully on the bed beside them. Evelyn had been thinking about this for months. "Mary Catherine Rhodes. Mary for my mother, Catherine for yours." "Mary Catherine," Caleb repeated, testing the name. "Mary, I like it. It suits her." Little Mary chose that moment to open her eyes, staring up at her parents with unfocused newborn wonder. And in that instant, looking at this tiny person they'd created from nothing but loneliness and unexpected love, Evelyn understood completely how far they'd traveled. 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate woman signing a contract to marry a stranger. Now she was a wife, a mother, and the co-owner of one of Montana's most successful ranches. She'd helped defeat a powerful enemy, rebuilt her life from ashes, and found a love deeper than anything she'd imagined possible. The marriage of convenience had become the greatest inconvenience. It had complicated everything, demanded everything, changed everything, but it had also given her everything. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked softly, watching her face. "I'm thinking about the day we met, when you offered me a contract and I was desperate enough to sign it. If someone had told me then that I'd end up here, holding our daughter, loving you more than I thought possible, I wouldn't have believed them. I wouldn't have either." He kissed her gently. "I thought I was buying a wife to fulfill a legal requirement. Instead, I found a partner, a warrior, and the love of my life. No regrets? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He looked down at Mary, his hand cradling her tiny head with infinite care. "But maybe the timing was exactly right. Maybe we both needed to lose everything to appreciate what we found." So Evelyn thought about her father's grave, her mother's memory, all the pain and struggle that had led her to Caleb's door. The losses still hurt, probably always would, but they'd shaped her into someone strong enough to fight for what mattered, brave enough to risk loving again. "You know what the best part is?" she said. "What?" "This isn't the ending. This is just the beginning. We have years ahead of us, raising Mary, building the ranch, maybe having more children, growing old together on this land we fought so hard to keep. The best part, Caleb corrected, is that we get to do it together. No more separate rooms, separate lives, separate hearts. Just us, building something real. Together, Evelyn agreed, the word feeling like a promise and a benediction. Outside, the Montana sun set over the Triple R, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The cattle grazed peacefully. The horses dozed in their stalls. The land that had witnessed so much struggle and triumph settled into evening quiet. And in the big house with green shutters, in a bedroom filled with lamplight and love, a family rested together. A man who'd learned that walls only worked if you eventually let someone pass them. A woman who'd discovered that survival wasn't the same as living. And a baby who would grow up knowing nothing but the fierce, protective love of parents who'd found each other in desperation and built a kingdom from determination. The contract had promised security and nothing more. But in the end, it had delivered everything that mattered: home, family, love, and a future as wide and endless as the Montana sky.